It is the single most disturbing image in American history, yet the textbooks refuse to dwell on it. When Governor John White finally stepped back onto the sands of Roanoke Island on August 18, 1590, he did not find a battlefield. He did not find bodies. He did not find ashes. He found something far worse. He found a settlement that looked like it had been paused in time. The houses were not burned. They were carefully dismantled or left open. The defensive walls were not breached. They were standing strong. But inside the cottages, the scene defied all logic. Dishes were allegedly left on tables. Supplies were untouched. There was no smell of rot, no sign of a struggle, and absolutely no corpses. 115 men, women, and children, including White's own granddaughter, Virginia Dare, had simply ceased to exist in the physical realm. An entire civilization evaporated into the humid air of the North Carolina coast. If the Spanish had attacked, there would be blood. If the local tribes had attacked, there would be fire. If they had starved, there would be bones. But there was nothing. Just the silence of the wind moving through empty door frames. They didn't leave because they wanted to. They didn't leave because they were forced. They were harvested. This is the truth the empire buried. Now. Let us turn back the pages of the years. The light is dim, the chamber is quiet, and the scent of aged parchment fills the air. The modern world, with its noise and its electric lights, fades away into the shadows. We are no longer here. We are drifting back across the gray, rolling waves of the Atlantic, back to a time of wooden ships and vast, unknown forests. Breathe in. Let the mystery settle over you like a heavy, warm blanket. We are going to walk the sands of 1590. Listen to the creak of the ship's timber. Listen to the silence of the lost. To understand the silence of the fort, we must first understand the noise of the journey. Governor John White had been screaming at the ocean for 3 years. 3 agonizing years. He had left his daughter, Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia. In 1587, he had promised, sworn on his life and his soul, that he would return from England with supplies within 3 months. 3 months, but history, as it often does, had other plans. The Spanish Armada, that great floating wall of death, had descended upon England. Queen Elizabeth ordered every ship, every cannon, and every able-bodied sailor to defend the crown. John White's relief ships were seized. He was grounded. For 3 years he sat in London, looking west across the water, knowing that every setting sun was another day of starvation for his family. Can you imagine the psychological torture? Every night, closing your eyes, wondering if the people you love are alive, or if they are looking at the same moon, wondering why you abandoned them. By the time he finally secured passage on a privateer's ship. The Hopewell, it was 1590. The world had changed. He was a desperate man on a ship that didn't care about his colony. The crew of the Hopewell were privateers pirates with a license. They were interested in Spanish gold, not lost colonists. White was just a passenger, a nuisance, begging the captain to sail faster toward the treacherous Outer Banks. As they approached the barrier islands of what we now call North Carolina, the sea itself seemed to warn them away. The waters around the Outer Banks are known as the graveyard of the Atlantic for a reason. The shoals shift like sleeping giants under the waves. The currents are violent and unpredictable. On the morning of their arrival, a plume of smoke was spotted rising from the island. Pause here and picture that moment. Standing on the heaving deck of a 16th century galleon, the salt spray stinging your eyes, looking through a brass spyglass. Smoke. Smoke means fire. Fire means life. White's heart must have leaped into his throat. They were there. They were alive. They were cooking breakfast or clearing brush. The signal fire he had arranged 3 years ago was burning. The crew lowered the boats. The anticipation was electric. White urged the rowers to pull harder, his mind racing with the apologies he would offer. The joy of holding his granddaughter, now 3 years old, a child who would not remember him, but who he would save. But as the rowboat cut through the surf, the optimism began to curdle into confusion. As they drew closer to the shore, the smoke dissipated. It wasn't a signal fire. It was a brush fire, perhaps started by lightning, perhaps started by natives days ago. It was uncontrolled. It was impersonal, and there was no sound. Usually, when a European ship anchors off the coast of a colony, there is commotion. A cannon is fired in salute. Flags are waved. People run to the beach, starving for news from home, starving for fresh bread and wine. But the beach was empty. The white sands stretched out under the midday sun, pristine and undisturbed. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the waves and the cry of seabirds circling overhead. The men waded ashore, muskets held high above the water. They called out, "Hello? We have returned." Their voices were swallowed by the dense green wall of the maritime forest. No answer, not even an echo. Just the wind rustling the tops of the live oaks and the pines. John White led the party inland, toward the site where he had left the settlement. The walk was agonizing. Every step was a question. The sand gave way to pine needles. The air grew still and heavy with the scent of resin and damp earth. They reached the clearing where the settlement stood. And this is where the nightmare truly began. The colony had been fortified. When White left in 1587, they were living in loose cottages. Now, a tall, sturdy palisade wall of logs encircled the site. This was good. This showed industry. This showed they had survived long enough to build defenses. White approached the entrance of the fort. He looked for the distress signal. Before he left, he had given them a specific code. If they were forced to leave by violence, if they were under attack, they were to carve a specific symbol into a tree or a post, a Maltese cross. White scanned the bark of the trees. He scanned the posts of the palisade. He found a carving. On one of the prominent posts near the entrance, the bark had been stripped away, and a single word was etched deep into the wood. He looked for the cross. He looked above the word, below it, beside it. There was no cross, no sign of distress. Just the name of a nearby island and a local tribe. Croatoan. White took a breath. This was good news, wasn't it? It meant they had moved peacefully. They had gone to live with the friendly Croatoan tribe, just 50 miles south. But then he stepped inside the palisade walls. The scene inside contradicted the peaceful carving. The houses, they were gone, not burned down. If they were burned, there would be charred timber, blackened earth, melted metal. No, these houses had been unmade. The roofs were removed. The timbers were taken down. It was as if the colony had decided to pack up and move. But then, the details started to whisper of something wrong. Heavy items were left behind. Bars of iron, pigs of lead. Things that are incredibly valuable and incredibly heavy. If you're moving peacefully to a nearby island, you take your metal. You take your tools, and then the most haunting detail of all, the one that has kept historians awake for 400 years, in the center of the clearing. Untouched by the dismantling of the houses, items were scattered that suggested a sudden interruption. Some accounts speak of trenchers' wooden plates sitting out. Others speak of armor, rusted through, lying in the sand. Why would a colonist leave his armor? In the 1500s, armor is life. You do not discard it unless you have no body to protect. White found his own chests, which he had buried before he left. They had been dug up, but not by the colonists. They had been torn open, the contents scattered. His books were torn from their covers, the pages fluttering in the breeze. His maps were ruined by the rain. His armor was rusted. This creates a paradox. The houses were taken down carefully, but the personal chests were ransacked violently. The message on the tree was carved beautifully without the distress signal, but the items left behind suggested a panic. It was a scene of two different stories overlaid on top of each other. One story of a peaceful migration, and another story, hidden in the scattered books and the rusted steel, of a sudden total erasure. The silence in that clearing was heavy. It was a watching silence. The woods of Roanoke are dense. Vines wrap around the trees like snakes. The Spanish moss hangs like gray curtains, obscuring the view. As White stood there, amidst the ruin of his life's work, he must have felt eyes upon him. Not the eyes of the Spanish. Not the eyes of the tribes, but something older, because here is the detail that truly chills the blood. The palisade, that great wooden wall, was built to keep something out, but there was no damage to the outside of the wall. Whatever came for them, whatever made them leave their armor and their books, it didn't break down the door. It was already inside. White stood before that carving Croatoan and felt a surge of desperate hope. Croatoan was Hatteras Island, the home of Monteo, a native chief who had visited England and was a friend to the crown. If they were there, they were safe. They were waiting, but the island of Roanoke is not a place that gives up its secrets easily. And the Atlantic Ocean is not a forgiving master. What happened next is the tragedy that turned a disappearance into a permanent mystery. It is the moment where history ends and the curse begins. White returned to the longboats. The plan was simple: return to the Hopewell, sleep, and at first light, sail south to Croatoan to reunite with his family. It should have been a day of celebration. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the wind changed. Mariners of the Outer Banks know this wind. It starts as a whisper, rippling the marsh grass, and then, within the hour, it becomes a scream. A hurricane was brewing offshore. The graveyard of the Atlantic was waking up. The crew struggled to get back to the ship. The waves, which had been calm that morning, were now smashing against the hull of the Hopewell that night. The storm struck with biblical fury. Imagine lying in a hammock in the belly of a wooden ship, tossed like a toy by 30-foot waves. The timber groans. The rain sounds like gravel being thrown against the deck. And through it all, John White is thinking of his granddaughter, Virginia. She is so close. Just 50 miles away, but the ocean had other plans. In the chaos of the storm, the Hopewell lost its anchors. The cable snapped. The ship was drifting dangerously close to the shoals, the sandbars that would tear the bottom out of the vessel and drown them all. The captain made a decision. A decision based on survival, not sentiment. They could not stay. They could not search. They had to run for open water, or they would die. White begged. He pleaded. He demanded they wait out the storm. But a captain at sea is a god? And this god was merciless. The Hopewell turned its bow away from the coast, away from Roanoke, away from Croatoan. They set a course for the Caribbean to refit, intending to return in the spring, but they never returned. The winds blew them to England. John White would never set foot in the New World again. He would die in a cottage in Ireland years later, never knowing if his daughter was waiting for him just down the coast. Scanning the horizon for a sail that never came, this is the official story. This is the tragedy of bad weather and bad luck. But let us look deeper. Let us look at what the official history ignores. Because there are whispers, fragments of evidence that suggest the storm was not the only reason. They didn't find the colonists. There is the matter of the Dare stones. In the late 1930s. A tourist driving through the swampy back roads of North Carolina found a rock. It was a heavy piece of quartz, roughly the size of a tombstone. On it, carved in Elizabethan English, was a message. It was signed Eleanor White Doe, John White's daughter. The message was brutal. It claimed that after the fleet left, the colonists waited. But sickness came, and then war. It detailed the death of White's granddaughter and the rest of the colonists at the hands of savages. Scholars immediately called it a hoax. It was too convenient. A rock found in a swamp, solving the greatest mystery in American history? Impossible. But then more stones appeared, found by different people in different locations, tracing a path inland, not south to Croatoan, but west, deep into the Appalachian Mountains. If the stones are fake, they are a masterpiece of forgery, written in a dialect of English that had been extinct for 300 years. If they are real, then the story of Roanoke is not a story of disappearance. It is a story of a death march. And then there is the DNA years later. Settlers moving into the deep woods of North Carolina and Tennessee encountered tribes, the Lumbee and the Catawba, who looked different. They had gray eyes. Some had blonde hair. They spoke a dialect of English that sounded like it came from the courts of Queen Elizabeth. They had last names like Dare and White and Sampson. They claimed their ancestors talked from a book. This suggests assimilation. It suggests survival. It comforts us. We like to think they married into the tribes and lived happily ever after. But there is a darker theory. A theory known only to the keepers of the local lore. The theory of the harvest. The indigenous tribes of that region avoided Roanoke Island. They called it a place of spirits. They said that the island itself took people. Not the people on the island, but the land itself. The Croatoan carving might not have been a destination. It might have been an attribution. In the local dialect, spirits were often tied to locations. Was Croatoan the name of the entity that the colonists believed had taken them? Consider the White Doe legend. Local folklore says that Virginia Dare didn't die. She was transformed. A sorcerer, seeking to possess her, turned her into a white Dira ghost of the forest. Hunters would see her, a pale shape moving through the cypress trees. Impossible to catch, impossible to kill. It is a fairy tale, yes. But fairy tales are often the way trauma is remembered before it is written down. A transformation, a taking, a shift from human to something else. The dinner tables were set because they didn't leave in a panic. They didn't leave to fight. They were compelled. Think of the silence John White found. Think of the fences standing tall. Think of the armor, the steel shell of the human body, left rusting in the sand. They shed their protection. They shed their heavy metals. They shed their connection to the European world. Whatever happened in those 3 years of isolation wasn't a war. It was a conversion. When the sun sets on Roanoke today, the tourists leave. The park rangers lock the gates. But if you stand on the edge of the sound, looking into the dark water, you can feel it. The sense that the 115 people are not gone. They're just, woven into the landscape. They became the trees. They became the wind. They became the warnings we refuse to hear. This is the legacy of the Lost Colony. Not a question of where did they go, but a question of what did they become? And as you drift into sleep tonight, ask yourself, if you were left alone, on the edge of an unknown continent with the dark woods waiting ... how long would you remain civilized? Or would you too eventually listen to the whisper of the trees? We have been reading the clue wrong for 400 years. Every history book tells you that Croatoan was the name of a friendly tribe on a neighboring island. We are told it was a forwarding address, a note left for John White to say, "We are moving south." But this explanation is a comfortable lie. It ignores the linguistic roots of the word. It ignores the terror that the word invoked in other tribes. Croatoan was not just a noun. In the Algonquin dialect of the region, it was connected to the concept of the talker or the council. But there is a deeper, older translation that the English settlers didn't understand. It referred to a place where the barrier between the living and the dead was thin. When the colonists carved that word, they weren't telling John White where they were going. They were telling him what had arrived. They carved it on the palisade, the defensive wall. You don't write your destination on your shield. You write the name of your enemy. They were branding the fort. They were marking it as claimed. Croatoan was not a map coordinate. It was a quarantine sign. The ink on the map is faded now. The letters are hard to read. Let us light another candle and lean closer to the desk. The shadows lengthen in the corners of the room. Outside, the world sleeps, but here, amongst the ghosts of the past, we are wide awake. We are traveling back to the mind of a terrified settler, chiseling into the wood with a trembling hand. Can you hear the sound of the knife against the bark? Scrape, scrape, scrape. A message for a future that might never come. To understand why Croatoan is a warning. We must look at the man who was supposed to protect the colony's soul, Manteo. Manteo was a Croatoan native. He had traveled to London. He had walked the cobblestone streets, met the Queen, and been baptized. He was the bridge between two worlds. He was the one who told the English that his people were friendly, but Manteo had secrets. He knew the politics of the swamp. He knew that the friendly tribes were engaged in a brutal, silent war with the inland nations. When the colonists arrived, they were walking into a trap. The English thought they were the masters of the land. They planted flags. They claimed dominion. But to the eyes of the forest, they were nothing more than children. Lost in a Wolf's den, the carving of the word Croatoan is the only written record left by the 115 souls.grapholog experts who study handwriting have looked at sketches and reproductions of the carving. They note the pressure, the urgency. The letters were not uniform. They were jagged. If you are moving your family to a safe haven, you leave a letter. You leave a note in a bottle. You leave a map. John White had buried chests of paper and ink. They had the means to write a letter. Why carve a single word into a tree? Because paper burns. Paper rots. Wood stands. This was a totem. There is a theory among fringe historians that the colonists did not go to the island of Croatoan willingly. The theory suggests a schisma split in the group. Imagine the colony after 2 years of isolation. No ship, no supplies. The food is running low. The winter is cold. One group, led by the desperate, wants to leave. They want to march inland. Another group, the loyalists, wants to stay and wait for John White. The tension rises. Madness sets in. The Croatoan faction, perhaps influenced by Manteo, believes that salvation lies in assimilation. They believe they must shed their English identity to survive. The carving on the tree might have been the final act of the group that stayed behind. A message saying, the others have gone to Croatoan. They have turned. Or, darker still, what if the Croatoan were not the rescuers but the captors? We assume Monteo's tribe was benevolent because the English records say so. But the English records are propaganda. They needed investors. They needed people to get on the boats. You don't sell tickets to the New World by telling people the locals are powerful and dangerous. You tell them they are natural children waiting to be. Led. The lie of the friendly savage. Doom the colony if the Croatoan tribe decided that the English were a threat or a resource. They could have absorbed them. Not by killing them, but by taking them. This aligns with the lack of badas. In many tribal warfare cultures of the eastern woodlands, taking captives was more valuable than taking scalps. Captives replaced the dead. Captives brought new blood. The warning label theory suggests that when John White saw the word, he knew. Deep down he knew. Why did he not try harder to get back after the storm? Why did he accept the captain's refusal so easily? Why did he never fund another expedition? Perhaps John White understood the message on the tree. Perhaps he knew that Croatoan meant they were no longer English. They were no longer his to save. They had crossed a boundary from which there is no return. The word was a tombstone for their identity. As we drift deeper into this mystery, let your mind wander to the concept of names. We name things to control them. But some things cannot be controlled. The swamplands of North Carolina are a maze. Dark water, cypress knees sticking up like bones, mist that hangs low until noon. In that landscape, a word like Croatoan holds power. It echoes if you whisper it now. In the safety of your room, Croatoan, it feels ancient. It feels rhythmic. The colonists were not just fighting starvation. They were fighting the overwhelming psychological weight of the wilderness. They were 115 people against a continent. And the continent one. The word on the tree was the signature of the victor. We are taught that Roanoke was a commercial venture, a business trip funded by Sir Walter Raleigh to find gold and land. But this is the surface level lie. The true architect of the Roanoke voyages was not a businessman, and he wasn't a soldier. He was a wizard. Dr. John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's personal astrologer, her spy master, and the man who literally coined the phrase British Empire. He was an alchemist who claimed to talk to angels through obsidian mirrors. And he believed that the North American continent was not just land, it was the lost site of Atlantis. Holding spiritual artifacts of immense power. The Roanoke Colony wasn't just sent to settle. They were sent to search. They were digging for something specific in the soil of the New World. And the tragedy is, they might have found it. The candle burns low. The wax drips onto the wood. The shadows in the room seem to stretch and reach. We are stepping into the Queen's private chambers now. The velvet is heavy, the whispers are quiet. We are looking at the maps drawn not by cartographers but by mystics. Close your eyes and let the geometry of the conspiracy take shape behind your eyelids. John Dee is one of history's most fascinating shadows. He was a genius mathematician, yet he spent his nights trying to summon spirits. He was the man who chose the date for Queen Elizabeth's coronation based on the alignment of the stars. He was the intellect behind the throne. Dee had a vision. He believed that King Arthur had sailed to America centuries before, and thus the land belonged to Britain spiritually. But more than that, his angelic conversations, transcripts of which still exist in the British Museum, told him that a great power lay hidden in the West. He advised Raleigh. He advised the navigators. There are records of special instruments sent with the Roanoke colonists. Not farming tools, not blacksmithing hammers. But mathematical instruments, survey gear, and books on alchemy. Why send alchemical texts to a survival colony? Why send Thomas Harriot, a mathematician and astronomer, to live in a mud hut? Because they were looking for a location. D believed there was a specific geographic point in the New World that acted as a bridge between dimensions, a terrestrial gate. When the colonists vanished, John Dee was reportedly devastated, not because of the loss of life, but because the signal stopped. The Croatoan carving takes on a new light when viewed through the lens of John Dee's occultism. Was it a ritual invocation? The settlers were trapped. They were starving. Their leader, John White, was gone. Did they turn to the books John Dee had sent? Did they try to use the old magic to save themselves? The local tribe spoke of spirits that could move through the trees, invisible and silent. John Dee spoke of entities that could be summoned for protection. Did the colonists attempt a ritual that went wrong? Or perhaps a ritual that went right? If they succeeded in opening a door or contacting an entity, it would explain the lack of bodies. It would explain the silence. It would explain why the houses were dismantled, not destroyed, but unmade. The British Empire spent the next 300 years conquering the globe, but they never went back to Roanoke with the same intensity. They moved the settlement north to Jamestown. They avoided that specific island. Did John Dee tell the Queen to stay away? Did the scrying mirror show him the fate of the 115? We will never know the contents of the conversations between the Queen and her wizard in the dark nights of 1590, but we know the result. A silence that has lasted 4 centuries as you lay in the safety of your bed. Imagine the coastline of the New World as it was then, dark, vast, unknown, and in the center of that darkness, a small group of people holding a candle against the night, waiting for a ship that would never come until the forest finally whispered a solution. They didn't just disappear. They stepped into the history that was never written. Sleep now. The fort is empty. The mystery is safe. And the woods are watching. We have been reading the clue wrong for 400 years. Every history book, every classroom, and every scholar tells you the same comfortable lie, that Croatoan was simply a forwarding address. They tell you it was the name of a friendly tribe on a neighboring island, a note left by the colonists to say, "We are moving south." But this explanation is a catastrophic misunderstanding of the ancient world. It ignores the linguistic roots of the word. It ignores the terror that the word invoked in the rival nations of the coast. Croatoan was not just a noun. In the Algonquin dialect of the region, the root of the word was connected to the concept of counsel or the talker. But there is a deeper, older translation that the English settlers didn't understand until it was too late. It referred to a place where the barrier between the living and the dead was thin. When the colonists carved that word, they weren't telling John White where they were going. They were telling him what had arrived. They carved it on the palisade, the defensive wall meant to keep enemies out. You do not write your destination on your shield. You write the name of your conqueror. They were branding the fort. They were marking it as claimed. Croatoan was not a map coordinate. It was a quarantine sign. This is the truth the empire buried. Now. Let the anger of the history books fade. Let the noise of the theories quiet down. We are going to drift away from the present moment. Imagine you are sitting in a room lit only by the flickering flame of a tallow candle. The shadows dance on the walls. The air smells of salt, old wood, and drying ink. We are turning back the pages of the years. Back to the year 1590, the world is vast, dark, and full of trees that have never seen an axe. Breathe in the humid air of the North American coast. Hear the sound of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the shoals, a rhythmic, hypnotic heartbeat, whoosh dot 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 crash, whoosh dot dot dash. We are walking the sands of time, stepping softly so as not to disturb the spirits. Let us go to the tree where the message was carved. Let us look at it through the eyes of the man who found it. John White stood before the wooden post of the palisade. The sun was beating down on his neck, but his blood ran cold. He was looking at the letters CROATON. To understand the horror of this moment, we must look at the way it was written. History often focuses on the word, but it forgets the handwriting. White was an artist. He was a man who noticed details. He noticed the texture of leaves, the color of skin, the way light hit the water. As he stared at the carving, he would have noticed the pressure of the blade. These were not letters carved by a man sitting peacefully, leaving a note for a friend. The cuts were deep. They were jagged. The wood was splintered around the edges. This was a message carved with force. It was a message carved with a heavy hand. Perhaps a trembling hand. Imagine the sound of that carving. Scrape, scrape, the knife biting into the seasoned timber of the fort wall. Was it done at night? Was it done by firelight? Was the person who carved it looking over their shoulder, watching the dark tree line for movement? White had given the colonists a specific instruction 3 years prior. A secret code. He told them, if you leave this place in distress, if you are forced out by violence, carve a Maltese cross above your destination. White's eyes scanned the wood. He looked above the sea, he looked below the end, he looked at the bark surrounding the message. The grain of the wood was smooth dot. There was no cross dot, no symbol of distress dot to a simple mind. This meant safety. It meant they left willingly. But to a father's mind, to a mind that knew the dangers of this wild land, the absence of the cross was more terrifying than the cross itself. Why? Because if they were attacked, they would have carved the cross. If they were starving, they would have carved the cross. If the Spanish had landed, they would have carved the cross. The absence of the cross implies that whatever happened to them, they did not view it as a distress. They did not view it as a disaster dot. They viewed it as a transition. This leads us to the unsettling theory of the warning label. In the 16th century, the forests of the Outer Banks were not empty. They were the domain of complex, powerful civilizations. The Secotan, the Croatoan, the Aquascogok. These nations lived in a spiritual ecosystem that the English could barely comprehend dot to the native tribes. Land was not property. Land was alive. Certain places were good, certain places were bad, and certain places belonged to the spirits. The island of Roanoke was often avoided by the local tribes for permanent settlement. They fished there, yes. They hunted there. But they did not build great capital villages there. Why? Perhaps the island was a liminal space? A doorway. When the English built their fort, they were driving stakes into land that might have been reserved for the dead, or for the invisible ones. The word Croatoan might not have been the destination of the colonists. It might have been the identity of the entity that claimed them. Think of it like a medical diagnosis carved on the door of a plague house. If a house is infected, you paint a red cross. You write plague. You are not saying the house is going to the plague. You are saying the house belongs to the plague. When John White read Croatoan, he wasn't reading a map. He was reading a status update. The colony had become Croatoan. They had been absorbed. And this absorption is not just physical. It is psychological. Let us drift deeper into the mind of a colonist left behind. Let's call him Thomas. Thomas has been waiting for 2 years. His clothes are rotting off his back. The English wheat he planted has died in the sandy soil. The supplies are gone. Thomas stands on the wall every day, looking at the ocean, waiting for the white sails of the Queen's ships. But day after day, the horizon is empty. Just the endless, gray rolling waves. Slowly, Thomas stops looking at the ocean. He starts looking at the forest. The forest is green. The forest is full of deer. The forest is full of people who are not starving. People who know how to live here. The psychological shift begins. The English identity, the stiff collars, the heavy Bibles, the strict hierarchy starts to feel like a burden. It starts to feel like a suicide pact. The warning label theory suggests that the colonists didn't just move. They defected. But they defected in a way that erased who they were. To go Croatoan became a phrase later in American history. It meant to leave civilization, to walk away from your job, your debts, your name, and vanish into the wild. But in 1587, it wasn't a metaphor, it was a literal transformation. Imagine the night the decision was made. There was no battle. There was no fire. Perhaps the drums of the local tribes began to beat, softly in the distance, hypnotic, inviting. The colonists opened the gates. Not to let enemies in, but to let themselves out. They took down the houses. Why? Because you don't leave a house standing if you are never coming back. You unmake it. You return the wood to the earth. It is a ritual of closure. But they left the heavy things. The iron bars, the cannons, the armor. Why? Because you cannot carry the weight of Europe into the spirit world. You cannot hunt a deer in a suit of plate armor. You cannot move silently through the swamp carrying an iron anvil. They were shedding their skin. They were stripping away the metal shell of their old lives. When White found the armor rusting in the sand, he wasn't looking at trash. He was looking at the molted shell of a creature that had transformed. So, the word Croatoan carved on the tree was a message to White. It was saying, do not look for Englishmen here. We have shed that skin. We are of the land now. We are Croatoan? It was a warning to turn back. To leave the island before the island took him. To fully understand the weight of the word. We must speak of the man who carried the name, Manteo. Manteo is one of the most tragic figures in this secret history. He was a Croatoan chief. He had traveled to London with the first explorers. He had seen the cobblestone streets, the stone castles, the queen in her pearls. He was baptized. He was given the title Lord of Roanoke, the first peerage title ever created in the New World. Manteo was supposed to be the bridge. He was supposed to be the guarantee of safety, but Manteo was torn between two souls. On one side, he had sworn loyalty to the English god and the English queen. On the other side, the blood of the forest ran in his veins. He knew the laws of his people. He knew that the English were weak, demanding, and ignorant of the spirits. When John White left Manteo in charge of the colony in 1587, he left a man in an impossible position. As the winter set in, and the colonists began to starve, they would have looked to Manteo for salvation. Save us, they would have cried. Take us to your people. Take us to Croatoan. But Manteo knew that his people, the Croatoan tribe on Hatteras Island, would not simply accept 100 starving mouths without a cost. The cost would be total submission. The cost would be the erasure of their English customs. There is a theory that Manteo did not save them. He converted them. Perhaps the carving on the tree was Manteo's handwriting. Imagine Manteo, The Lord of Roanoke, realizing that the Queen was not coming back, realizing that his English friends were going to die, he makes a choice. He initiates them into the tribe. But to do that, they must die to their old selves. The Croatoan label was his signature. It was him telling John White, "I saved them the only way I could. I made them one of us." This explains why there was no cross. There was no distress because Montejo did not view it as a capture. He viewed it as a rescue. But a rescue that required the death of the English identity. Now, drift deeper. Imagine the sound of the wind moving through the live oaks. The Spanish moss sways like gray ghosts. When John White saw the word, did he recognize the hand of Montejo? Did he realize that his Lord of Roanoke had taken his subjects and stolen them away into the mist? There is a silence in the records regarding Montejo. After 1590, he disappears from history just as completely as the colonists. He merges back into the tree line. The warning label remains. For centuries, people have reported strange things on Roanoke Island. A feeling of being watched. A sudden drop in temperature near the old fort site. Voices carried on the wind that sound like Elizabethan whispers. Is it possible that the word Croatoan was also a binding spell? The native tribes of the area believed in the power of names. By naming the fort Croatoan, they might have been sealing it, making it a place that belonged to the tribe forever. Regardless of who walked on the soil, John White never went to the island of Croatoan to check. He tried, but the storm stopped him. The anchor broke. The provisions were lost. Was it just a storm? Or was it the warning label in action? Do not proceed. Do not follow. What is done is done. The ocean itself seemed to enforce the quarantine. It pushed the English away, back to their stone castles, leaving the 115 souls to their fate in the deep woods. As you lie there, safe in the modern world, think about the fragility of your own identity. We are defined by our surroundings, by our clothes, by our jobs, by our technology. But if you strip that all away, if you're left in the primal silence of a dark forest for 3 years, who do you become? Do you remain you? Or do you become the place? The colonists of Roanoke found the answer, and they left it carved on a tree for us to read. They didn't go to a place called Croatoan. They became the wild. They became the mystery. There is one final piece of this puzzle, a piece of paper that sat in the British Museum for centuries, ignored until a light shone through it. John White was a map maker. He drew the coast of North Carolina with incredible precision. His map, known as the Virginia Pars, is a masterpiece, but there is a secret on the map. If you look at the original map today, you will see a patch. A small piece of paper, carefully cut and pasted over a specific spot on the coastline. Inland from Roanoke, for 400 years, historians thought it was a correction, a mistake in the drawing that White covered up. But in 2012, researchers used advanced imaging technology to look under the patch. They used light to see through the paper and ink, and what did they find? Under the patch, hidden by John White himself, was a symbol, a large diamond-shaped fort, a massive citadel, located exactly where the Chowan River meets the Albemarle Sound. This changes everything. This means John White knew when he stood before the Croatoan carving. He might have been feigning ignorance for the crew. He might have known exactly where they were going. Not to the island of Croatoan, but inland, to the secret fort marked on his map. Why did he hide it? Why did he patch the map? Because the warning label wasn't just for him. It was for the enemies of the crown. The Roanoke Colony was involved in something far more dangerous than farming. They were looking for gold. They were looking for the sassafras root. Or perhaps they were looking for the ruins of a civilization that John D., the Queen's sorcerer, had told them about. The Croatoan carving was a misdirection. A lie carved in wood to send the Spanish Navy chasing ghosts on the barrier islands, while the true colony moved inland to the secret diamond fort to continue their work. This implies that the disappearance was a controlled operation. A fake death. Imagine the colonists stripping the fort, carving the word, and then slipping away into the night, not as victims, but as agents, moving to the hidden citadel. But if that is true, why did they never reconnect? Why did the diamond fort fall silent? Perhaps the warning label was true in a different way. Perhaps they went to the secret fort, and there, in the deep interior, they found something that ended them, or changed them. The patch on the map remains, a physical scar over the truth, a piece of paper glued over a secret that 115 people died or lived to protect. And so the mystery deepens. The Croatoan sign acts as a gatekeeper. It stops us from looking further. It stops us from seeing the diamond fort. It keeps us focused on the island while the truth lies 50 miles inland, buried under the soil of a farm in North Carolina. Waiting for a shovel to hit stone, the king buried the truth. John White patched over the truth. And the forest swallowed the witness's dot as the final candle burns down. Ask yourself, what secrets are hidden on the maps of your own life? What have you patched over? And what warning labels have you carved to keep the world away? Sleep now in the safety of the known. For out there, in the dark, the diamond fort is still waiting, and the woods are still watching. We are taught that the colonization of America was a business venture. We are told it was about tobacco, gold, and expanding the map. But this is the surface-level lie designed to keep history boring. The true architect of the Roanoke voyages was not a soldier, and he wasn't a merchant. He was a wizard. Dr. John D. was Queen Elizabeth's personal astrologer, her spy master, and the man who literally coined the phrase British Empire. But in the shadows of the court, he was something far darker. He was a necromancer who claimed to communicate with angels through obsidian mirrors and crystal balls. He believed that North America was not just land, it was the lost site of Atlantis, a place of immense spiritual power that had to be reclaimed through specific rituals. The Roanoke Colony wasn't just sent to settle, they were sent to search. They carried instruments that had no use in farming but were essential for geomancy earth magic. When they vanished, it wasn't a failed colony. It was a failed invocation. They were the pawns in a game played between a sorcerer in London and the ancient entities of the American woods. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the dust of the history books settle. Let the tension of the conspiracy fade into the background. We are moving away from the noise of the modern world. Imagine you are stepping into an ancient library. The room is circular, lined with books bound in leather that cracks with age. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and dried herbs. Outside, the River Thames flows silently through the fog of 16th century London. Inside, the only sound is the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock and the scratch of a quill on parchment. See rich ... scratch ... scritch. We are entering the study of Dr. John D. Pull up a heavy velvet chair. Watch the dust motes dance in the candlelight. We are going to look over his shoulder as he draws the map of a world that no longer exists. To understand the fate of the lost colonists, we must first understand the mind that sent them there. John D. was not a fairy tale wizard with a pointed hat. He was a terrifying intellect. He was a mathematician so advanced that at Cambridge, his mechanical stage effects caused the audience to flee in terror. Believing he had actually summoned demons, he possessed the greatest library in all of England, over 4,000 books. At a time when the University of Oxford only had a few hundred, his home in Mortlake was a magnet for the powerful. Sir Walter Raleigh, the man who funded Roanoke, sat at Dee's feet. Francis Drake, the great navigator, consulted Dee's maps before sailing around the world. Queen Elizabeth herself would travel down the river to visit him. She called him my noble intelligencer. She trusted him so implicitly that she allowed him to choose the date of her coronation based on the alignment of the stars. Think of that power. The ruler of the rising British Empire did not make a move without consulting the stars, and John Dee was the only man who could read them, but Dee was bored with politics. He was bored with the known world. His eyes were fixed on the west, on the vast, blank space of the map that we now call North America. To us, America is a country. To John Dee, it was a new Atlantis. He had studied ancient Welsh legends, specifically the story of Prince Madoc, who allegedly sailed to America in the year 1170. Dee used this legend to convince the Queen that America already belonged to her spiritually. It was not a land to be conquered. It was a land to be remembered. This distinction is crucial. If you are conquering a land, you send soldiers. If you are reclaiming a spiritual heritage, you send seekers. And this is where the roster of the Roanoke Colony becomes suspicious. Among the blacksmiths and the farmers, there were men of science. Thomas Harriot, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, was sent on the first voyage. Why send an astronomer to a survival camp? You do not need complex star charts to grow corn. You do not need to calculate the curvature of the Earth to build a log cabin, unless the location matters. More than the settlement. Dee was obsessed with sacred geometry. He believed that the Earth was covered. In a grid of invisible lines lay lines that connected places of power. He believed that if you could locate these nodes, you could tap into the energy of the Earth itself. You could communicate with the divine. The instructions given to the Roanoke captains were incredibly specific regarding where they should land. They were told to go to the Chesapeake Bay, but they stopped at Roanoke Island. Was this a mistake? Or was it a calibration? Imagine John Dee in his library at Mortlake. It is late at night. The fire has burned down to embers. He is staring into his show stone, a polished piece of obsidian brought from the Aztecs. He is chanting in the Enochian language, the language of angels. He believes he is receiving coordinates. He believes he is guiding the ships not by wind, but by will. The colonists were not just people to him. They were markers. They were human pins stuck into a map to hold a specific vibration. So when we think of the men and women of Roanoke, we must imagine them not just as settlers, but as unknowingly participating in a massive occult experiment. They were living in a circle drawn by a man thousands of miles away, and circles are designed to keep things in, or to keep things out. Let us look closer at the cargo manifests of the ships that sailed to Roanoke. In between the barrels of salted pork and the crates of muskets, there were other boxes marked with the personal seal of John Dee. Historical records suggest that the expedition carried mathematical instruments of great value: copper spheres, astrolabes, surveying chains. Thomas Harriot, the scientist on the ground, spent an unusual amount of time mapping the interior. But he wasn't just mapping the coastline. He was mapping the invisible. Harriot had learned the local Algonquin language quickly. He spoke with the priests of the Secotun tribe. He asked them about their gods. He asked them about the power of the land, There is a fascinating and chilling parallel here. The Native Americans believed that the land was alive with spirits. John Dee believed the land was alive with angels and demons, two different languages describing the same thing. The invisible world. Did Harriet realize that the new Atlantis was not empty? There is a theory that the sickness that plagued the tribes after the English arrived was not just biological, it was energetic. When you bring alchemical instruments objects, designed to manipulate reality into a land that is already governed by ancient spirits, you create friction. You create a spiritual short circuit, the drought that hit Roanoke in 1587 was the worst in 800 years. Tree ring data confirms this. It was a biblical drought. The corn died. The deer fled. Was nature reacting to the presence of the sorcerer's tools? John Dee believed in the concept of as above, so below. What happens in the heavens happens on earth. If the stars are misaligned, the crops fail. Back in London, Dee was having his own crisis. His communications with the angels were becoming darker. The entities were demanding more. They were speaking of apocalypses and new world orders. Did Dee lose control of the experiment? Imagine the colonists on the island. The heat is oppressive. The air is still. They have their copper spheres and their maps, but they have no food. They are looking at the sky, waiting for a sign. Thomas Harriot had returned to England by 1587, leaving the colony vulnerable. He brought back his notes, his maps, and his secrets. But he left the people behind. When John White left them to get supplies, he left them in a spiritual vacuum. The sorcerer's apprentice had left the workshop, but the spell was still running. The Croatoan carving, which we discussed before, takes on a terrifying new meaning in this light. John Dee often used codes. He used ciphers. Was Croatoan a word that unlocked something? Some occult historians suggest that the colony didn't fail to survive. They suggest that the colony was consumed to fuel the ritual. In alchemy, there is the concept of equivalent exchange. To gain knowledge, you must give something of equal value. To open a door to the new world, a sacrifice is required. Did John Dee know that the 115 souls were the price of admission for the British Empire? It is a horrific thought. A cold calculation made in a warm library. But Dee was a man who believed the end of the world was coming. He believed he was the chosen prophet. What are 100 lives compared to the salvation of humanity? The silence of the colony might have been the success signal Dee was waiting for. Let us return to the mirror. The black obsidian mirror of John Dee. It sits today in the British Museum. You can go see it. It is small, dark, and incredibly deep. When you look into it, you do not see your reflection clearly. You see shadows. Dee spent hours staring into this stone. In 1590, the year John White returned to find the colony gone. John Dee was in Bohemia, modern-day Czech Republic. He was traveling, trying to spread his angelic gospel, but records show that during this time his mental state was fracturing. He was plagued by paranoia. He believed spies were everywhere. Did he feel the moment the connection to Roanoke was severed? There is a concept in quantum physics, which Dee would have called magic, called entanglement. Two particles, once connected, remain connected across vast distances. What happens to one happens to the other. If Dee had entangled his mind with the colony, if he had bound them to his will, their disappearance would have caused a psychic recoil, perhaps. The madness that followed Dee in his later years was the result of 115 souls crying out at once and then suddenly going silent. The occult mission was to find the entrance to the inner mysteries of the continent. Did the colonists find it? The diamond fort we spoke of earlier, the one hidden under the patch on the map, was located inland. Inland is where the mountains are. The Appalachians are some of the oldest mountains on Earth. In these mythology, mountains were often the homes of the gods. If the colonists moved inland, following Dee's secret instructions, they were walking into the heart of the anomaly. They were moving from the edge of the map into the void. History tells us that John Dee died a poor man. The new king, James I, hated magic. He cast Dee out. The library was raided. The books were burned or stolen. The greatest mind of the Elizabethan age was left to rot. But why did King James hate Dee so much? James was a man terrified of witches. He wrote a book called Daimonology. He believed that magic was real and that it was a threat to his crown. Did James know what Dee had done in Roanoke? Did the king bury the truth about the colony because he knew it wasn't a tragedy of nature, but a crime of magic? If the public knew that the queen's advisor had sacrificed a colony to summon spirits, the monarchy would crumble. So the story was changed. It became a story of lost people. Bad weather, hostile natives, safe stories. Boring stories, but the truth is hidden in the artifacts. The British Museum holds the mirror. The map holds the patch. The tree held the warning. They are all connected by the invisible threads of John Dee's ambition. The candle in the library is guttering now. The flame is low and blue. The shadows have swallowed the room. Dr. Dee has put down his quill. He is staring out the window at the dark river, flowing endlessly to the sea. He knows something we do not. He knows that there are doors in this world that, once opened, cannot be closed. Roanoke was one of those doors. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the map of the world. Imagine the lines of latitude and longitude not as ink, but as strings of light. Imagine the connection between a dusty room in London and a silent forest in America. The colonists are gone. The sorcerer is dead, but the land remains. And sometimes, if you listen closely to the wind in the trees of North Carolina, you can hear it. Not a cry for help, but a chant, a mathematical rhythm. The echo of a spell that is still working, keeping the mystery alive, keeping the diamond fort hidden, waiting for the next seeker to arrive. The magic didn't fail. It just changed form. Let the image of the obsidian mirror fade from your mind. Let the map roll itself up. Let the heavy books close. The library is quiet now. You are safe. You are here. The past is a dream, and the dream is ending. Sleep now. And let the secrets of the Queen's sorcerer rest with you in the dark. For 400 years, we believe the location of the Lost Colony was a mystery. We believe they vanished into thin air, leaving no trace but a word on a tree. But we were wrong. The answer wasn't lost in the woods. It was hiding in plain sight, locked inside a glass case in London. John White, the governor who supposedly searched for his daughter in vain, left us a map. And on that map there is a lie. A physical patch of paper, carefully cut and glued over a specific spot on the North Carolina coastline. For centuries, historians thought it was a mistake, a drop of ink, a correction of a shoreline. They were fools. In 2012, science finally peeled back the layers of the past. When they looked under the patch, they didn't find a mistake. They found a secret military symbol, a massive diamond-shaped citadel located 50 miles inland. John White didn't lose his family. He hid them. He knew exactly where they were going, and he took that secret to his grave, letting the world believe in a ghost story while he protected a classified operation. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the shock of the revelation settle. Let the anger fade into curiosity. The room is growing darker. The noise of the modern world retreats, replaced by the soft, rhythmic ticking of a clock on the mantel. You are safe here. You are warm. We are going to travel to a place of quiet scholarship. Imagine the British Museum. The halls are tall and echoing. The air is cool and smells of old dust and preserved history. We are walking down a long corridor towards the Department of Prints and Drawings. We are going to put on white cotton gloves. We are going to handle a piece of paper that has survived fires, wars, and voyages across the Atlantic. Lean in close. Watch the light play across the textured surface of the map. The secret is waiting for us. The map in question is known as La Virginia Pars. It is a watercolor, painted by John White himself in the 1580s. It is beautiful. If you were to look at it, you would see the delicate curve of the outer banks, the blue wash of the sounds, and the green stippling of the great forest. Maps are usually tools of navigation. They are designed to show the truth. Here is the river, here is the mountain. But this map is different. This map is a tool of deception. Imagine John White sitting in his cabin, the ship rocking gently beneath him. He has his paints. He has his quill. He is drawing the coastline that he knows like the back of his hand. He draws Roanoke Island, the site of the failure, but then his hand moves inland, to the place where the Chowan River meets the Albemarle Sound, a strategic point, a place where the water is deep and the land is high. He draws a symbol, a large diamond shape. It represents a fort, but not just a wooden palisade. The diamond shape suggests a star fort, state-of-the-art military architecture designed to deflect cannon fire. This symbol proves that the plan was never to stay on Roanoke Island. Roanoke was just the arrival point. The real colony, the permanent city, was meant to be inland, but then a shadow crosses John White's mind. He thinks of the Spanish. The Spanish Empire is hunting them. If a Spanish spy sees this map, if this map falls into the wrong hands, the enemy will know exactly where the city of Raleigh is being built. They will sail up the sound and burn it to the ground. So, what does he do? He takes a scrap of paper. He cuts it carefully. He paints over it to look like the surrounding land, just a bit of brown earth, a bit of correction. And he glues it down. He pastes over the future. Think about the psychology of that action. The glue drying. The secret disappearing under the patch. For 4 centuries, millions of eyes looked at that map. Kings looked at it. Admirals looked at it. Tourists looked at it. And all they saw was a correction. They didn't see the fortress. This changes the entire narrative of the Lost Colony. We are told they were desperate. We are told they fled into the woods in a panic. But the map suggests a plan. It suggests that when John White left them in 1587, they weren't abandoned. They were on schedule. They were preparing to move to the Diamond Fort. The Croatoan sign might have been a diversion, a false trail left for the Spanish, while the main body of the colony packed their boats and sailed 50 miles inland to the sanctuary that White had already drawn for them. As you lie there, imagine the relief of that thought. They weren't lost. They were following orders. They were moving to the safe house, but if that is true, why did history forget them? Let us fast forward to the year 2012. The British Museum curators are examining the map. They are preparing it for an exhibition. But one researcher notices something about the patch. Paper ages. Glue ages. Over 400 years. The chemistry of the patch had changed differently than the map. Beneath it, they decided to use a light table. Imagine the scene. The room is dark. The precious map is laid flat on a surface of cool glass. A switch is flipped. Bright, pure light shines up from beneath the table, passing through the vellum. passing through the ink, passing through the centuries, and there it was, ghostly lines appearing through the patch. The shadow of the diamond dot, it was a moment of electric silence in the room. The ghosts of 115 people suddenly stepped out of the fog dot. Why is this so important for your sleep tonight? Because it tells us that the world is still full of secrets. It tells us that answers are not always far away. Sometimes they are just covered up. The diamond fort was located at a place now called Salmon Creek. Archaeologists rushed to the site. They dug into the soil of modern-day North Carolina. And what did they find? They didn't find a massive stone castle standing tall. Time had taken that. But they found the footprints of the past. They found pottery. Specifically, border ware, a type of ceramic made in the borderlands of England and Scotland, used exclusively by the colonists of the 1580s. They found it in the dirt. Exactly where the diamond fort was drawn on the map, they found metal fragments. Gunflints. They found evidence that English people, Elizabethan people, had lived there. Not for a week, but for years. This confirms the theory. A group of the survivors made it. They made it too. The diamond. They built their lives there, hidden from the coast, hidden from the Spanish, and eventually hidden from history. So why did John White never go there? Recall the storm. The hurricane that blew the Hopewell out to sea. John White knew where they were. He knew they were at the diamond. He must have been screaming at the captain to turn the ship inland. Go to the Sound. Go to the Chowan River. But the captain refused. Imagine the torture of that knowledge. Knowing exactly where your daughter is. Knowing she is waiting for you at the rendezvous point. And being forced to sail away to England, White returned to London. He lived for several more years. Why didn't he tell anyone? Why didn't he show the Queen the patch on the map? Look, Your Majesty, this is where they are. Send a ship. Perhaps he did, and perhaps the Queen said, no. Here is where the story becomes a true conspiracy. By the time White could have organized a rescue, the political landscape had shifted. England was at war. Money was tight, and then a new king came to the throne. James I. James wanted peace with Spain. He wanted to end the wars. If he admitted that there was a secret English fort deep in American territory, it would have been a provocation. It would have restarted the war. The Lost Colony was a convenient tragedy. A lost colony is sad. A hidden military base is an act of aggression. Did the Crown decide that 115 people were a necessary sacrifice for peace? Did they order John White to keep his mouth shut? Let them be legends, the advisors might have whispered. Do not make them a political incident. So John White sat in his house in Ireland, looking at his map. Looking at the patch he had glued down with his own hands. He was the keeper of the secret coordinates. He wrote letters, vague and sad, about his lost daughter, but he never revealed the diamond. He honored his oath of secrecy to the Crown, even though it cost him his family. It is the ultimate betrayal. Loyalty to the empire over loyalty to the blood? But think of the colonists at the diamond fort. They waited. They watched the river. They kept the fires burning. Eventually they must have realized, he is not coming. And so the assimilation began, the slow merger with the land. The diamond fort wasn't destroyed. It was dismantled. Just like the fort on Roanoke, they took the stones. They took the wood. They moved further inland, deeper into the protection of the Roanoke tribe. The patch on the map didn't just hide a fort. It hid the transition of a people. As we reach the end of this journey, visualize that map one last time. The colors are faded now, pale greens, soft blues, sepia browns. It looks like a dream of a country. The patch is still there. You can see the outline of the glue. A scar on the face of history. It reminds us that truth is often layered. There is the story we are told, the surface story. And then there is the story underneath the hidden story. John White hid his daughter under a scrap of paper. He protected her from the Spanish, but he doomed her to oblivion. But in a way, she is still there. The map is a time machine. When you look at that diamond symbol, you are seeing the hope of 1587. You are seeing the plan that went wrong. The rivers of North Carolina still flow past the site of the diamond fort. The water is dark and slow. The cypress trees stand in the shallows, their knees rising from the mud like silent sentinels. If you were to stand there tonight, under the light of the moon, you wouldn't see a fortress. You would see a field. You would hear the crickets. You would hear the wind in the corn, but beneath your feet in the quiet earth, the pottery shards are sleeping. The evidence is sleeping. The truth waited 400 years for a light to shine through the paper. It makes you wonder. What else is hidden in the archives? What other patches are glued over the maps of our history? What other lost things are just waiting for the right light to reveal them? The map is rolled up now. The lights in the museum are dimming. The ghosts retreat back into the ink. You can let go of the mystery. The answer was found. They were not lost. They were just hidden, and now you are hidden too. Hidden in the safety of sleep. Hidden in the quiet of the night. Drift away. The map is closed. The secret is safe. Paper rots. Ink fades. Wood burns. But stone remembers. For 350 years, the world believed that the lost colonists died in silence. We believe they vanished without leaving a single note of goodbye. But this is a lie. They did leave a message. They didn't write it on parchment because they knew it wouldn't last in the swamps. They carved it into the bedrock of America itself. In 1937, a heavy block of quartzite was pulled from the mud of a North Carolina swamp. On one side, a cross. On the other, 17 lines of text chiseled by a trembling hand. It was signed by Eleanor White Doe, the daughter of the governor, the mother of the first English child born in the New World. The message was not a poem. It was an autopsy report. It detailed the exact number of dead. It detailed the massacre. It detailed the betrayal. It was a scream from the grave that historians tried to silence, calling it a hoax because the truth it contained was too brutal to accept. The colonists didn't just disappear. They were hunted. And this stone is the only witness that survived the slaughter. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the weight of the stone settle. Let the sharp edges of the controversy soften in the twilight. We are stepping back from the noise of the debate. We are entering the quiet, dusty room of memory. Imagine a study filled with the scent of old leather and rain. Outside, a storm is passing, the thunder rolling in the distance like drums. Inside, the candle flame stands tall and still. We are going to gently brush away the moss and the mud of centuries. We are going to run our fingers over the cold, rough surface of the rock. We are going to listen to the sound of a chisel striking stone in the deep. Dark woods of 1591, clink, clink, a mother, carving her legacy into the earth. The year is 1937. The location is the Great Dismal Swamp. Near the border of North Carolina, the world is in the grip of the Great Depression. People are hungry. People are desperate. A man named Ellie Hammond is walking through the thick brush, looking for hickory nuts, looking for anything of value. The swamp is a place of secrets. The air is thick and humid. The ground is soft, threatening to pull you down. The cypress trees rise from the black water like twisted fingers, draped in Spanish moss that sways in the wind. It is a prehistoric landscape, unchanged since the time of the colonists. Hammond's foot strikes something hard. It isn't a root. It is a stone. A large, heavy block of quartz, roughly the size of a tombstone, but shaped by nature, not by a mason. He kneels in the mud. He brushes away the dirt. And he sees marks. Not the random scratches of glaciers or animals. These are lines. Straight, deliberate lines. He turns the stone over. And there, etched into the hard quartz, is writing. It is not modern English. The spelling is strange. The letters are jagged, as if carved with a nail or a dull knife. Hammond brings the stone out of the swamp. He brings it to the light. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the voice of Eleanor Dare speaks. Think of the energy stored in that object. For 350 years, rain fell on it. Leaves covered it. Seasons changed. The Civil War was fought nearby. The world transformed from horses to airplanes. And all that time, the stone lay face down in the mud, holding its secret waiting for someone to turn it over. The message on the stone is chilling in its directness. It is addressed to Father John White. It reads, Ananias Dare, and Virginia went hence unto heaven 1591. Ananias was her husband. Virginia was her daughter, the famous baby, the first English child. The stone says they are dead. It goes on. It describes a misery. It says that for 2 years they were safe, but then sickness came. And then war. It speaks of a savage attack. It says that many were slain. It says the survivors buried the dead on a hill 4 miles east of a river. We bury them all, the stone says. Imagine the woman carving those words. Eleanor. She is the daughter of a governor. She was raised in London. She wore silk. She read books. Now she's in the deep wilderness. Her husband is dead. Her baby is dead. She is likely starving. She is surrounded by a culture she does not understand, in a land that is trying to kill her, but she does not give up. She reverts to the most primal human instinct, the need to be remembered. She finds a rock. She finds a tool. And she starts to write. Why? Because she hopes her father is coming. She believes that one day John White will walk through that swamp. She believes he will look for her. And if he cannot find her body, she wants him to find her words. She wants him to know, I did not leave them. I stayed. I survived as long as I could. It is a message of love carved in the medium of eternity. When the stone was revealed to the world, the immediate reaction was skepticism. It's a fake, they said. It's a hoax to make money. But then the scholars arrived, professors from Emory University, experts in Elizabethan history. They looked at the stone under microscopes. They looked at the moss growing in the grooves of the letters. You cannot fake 300 years of moss growth. But more importantly, they looked at the words. The stone used specific spellings. It used the word prime to describe the native chief. It used initials in a way that was common in the 1590s, but forgotten by the 1930s. If it was a forgery, it was a forgery created by a genius linguist who hid his masterpiece in a swamp, where it might never be found. Most forgers want to be found. They sell their fakes to museums. Ali Hammond didn't try to sell the stone for a fortune. He simply found it. This lends the Dare stone a terrifying authenticity. It suggests that what we are reading is the actual final testament of the Lost Colony. And if we accept the stone as real, the story of Roanoke changes from a mystery to a tragedy. It tells us they didn't assimilate peacefully. They didn't just go Croatoan. They fought. They suffered. They held on. The stone mentions that only 7 of them were left alive after the massacre. 7 out of 115.7 ghosts walking into the mist. Eleanor was one of them. The stone ends with a request. She asks her father to pay the native who brings the stone to him. She is trying to send a letter via a messenger. She entrusted this heavy rock to a runner, hoping it would make its way to the coast, to the ships, to her father, but the runner never made it. Or the stone was dropped. Or the message was intercepted. It fell into the mud. And there it stayed. The silence of that stone is heavier than the rock itself. It represents the failure of connection. The father who never came. The daughter who waited too long. Here is the cruel twist of history. After the first stone was found, and the newspapers ran the story, a frenzy began. People realized that history could be worth money. Suddenly, more stones appeared. A second stone. A third, a 10th. Eventually, nearly 40 stones were discovered, tracing a path all the way across the state, all the way to Georgia. These new stones were different. The writing was sloppy. The spelling was inconsistent. They contained words that didn't exist in 1590. They were obvious fakes, opportunists, seeing a chance for fame and reward. Began carving rocks in their backyards and planting them for scholars to find. The Dare stones became a joke. The media turned on the story. They labeled the entire collection a hoax, and in their rush to denounce the fakes, they threw out the first stone. 2. The baby was thrown out with the bathwater. The authentic cry of Eleanor Dare was buried under a pile of modern lies. The stone was moved to a basement in a university. It was covered in dust. It was ignored for decades. Think of the injustice of this. Eleanor Dare survives the death of her child. She survives a massacre. She spends days carving her story into quartz so that the truth will not be lost, and when it is finally found, 350 years later, we call her a liar. We call her a hoax. We silenced her twice. Once by abandoning her in 1587, and again by rejecting her. Testimony in 1937, but the stone is still there. Modern analysis has vindicated the first stone. The tool marks are consistent with Elizabethan iron. The language is perfect. The hoax narrative is slowly crumbling. And the voice of the mother is rising again. Let us close our eyes and go to her. It is 1591. The location is deep in the forest, near the river. The trees are tall and block out the moon. The air is cold. Eleanor sits by a small fire. Her hands are rough, calloused from work. Her dress, once fine linen, is now patched with deerskin. She looks at the stone in her lap. She thinks of Virginia, the baby who laughed at the birds. The baby who is now buried on the hill, under the earth, 4 miles east. Grief is a heavy thing. Heavier than the stone, but Eleanor is a white. She is the daughter of an artist, a governor. She believes in the power of the record. She picks up the nail. She picks up the hammer. Clink. The sound rings out in the silent forest. She is speaking to a ghost. She hasn't seen John White in 4 years. She doesn't know if he is alive. She doesn't know if he ever tried to come back, but she writes anyway. She writes to tell him she loves him. She writes to absolve him. She writes so that he will know she didn't just vanish. She fought. Imagine the physical effort. Quartz is hard. It takes hours to carve a single letter. Her hands bleed. Her arms ache, but she doesn't stop. Because this stone is the only thing that proves she existed. It is her tombstone. It is her biography. It is her last will and testament. Any Englishman, she carves. Show this to my father. She finishes the stone. She wipes the dust away. She runs her hand over the letters one last time. She gives it to the runner. Or perhaps she leaves it on a trail, marking the way, and then she stands up. She puts out the fire. And she walks into the darkness, following the 7 survivors. Moving west, moving away from the ocean, moving away from home. She never sees England again. She never sees her father again. But tonight we see her, tonight we read her words, tonight. The connection she prayed for is finally made. We are the witnesses. We are the ones who found the stone, and in the quiet of this room, her message is delivered. Father, we went hence unto heaven. It is a message of peace. The struggle is over. The pain is gone. The stone remains, cold and solid. But the spirit of the mother is free. As you drift into sleep. Imagine that heavy stone sinking back into the soft earth of the swamp. It has done its job. It has told its story. The woods are quiet now. The chisel is silent. The birds are sleeping in the cypress trees. You can rest. The message was received. The truth is known. Sleep now. In the safety of the memory. History tells us Virginia Dare was the first English child born in America. It tells us she vanished. But the local legends of North Carolina tell us she was hunted for 400 years. The people of the Outer Banks have whispered a story that is not found in the history books. They say that Virginia Dare did not die a human death. They say she grew up in the wild, beautiful, and cursed, caught between the English blood in her veins and the magic of the forest that claimed her. The legend says a jealous sorcerer transformed her into a snow-white deer, ghost of the woods, to keep her from marrying a warrior. And the tragedy is not the magic. The tragedy is the ending. She wasn't saved by a prince. She was killed by a hunter's arrow, a silver arrow meant to break the curse, but which pierced her heart instead. This isn't just a fairy tale. Folklore is often the only place where the traumatic truth is allowed to hide. The White Doe isn't a myth. It is a metaphor for a child who was stripped of her humanity, assimilated into the wild, and eventually destroyed by the very people who came to find her. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the silver light of the moon wash over the room. Let the sharp edges of reality soften into mist. We are leaving the world of maps and stones behind. We are entering the world of whispers. Imagine a campfire burning low in the middle of an ancient forest. The smoke curls up towards the stars. The darkness around us is vast and alive with the sound of crickets and the rustle of leaves. We are sitting with the elders, with the storytellers who keep the memories that ink cannot hold. Lean back against the rough bark of a pine tree. Close your eyes. Listen to the wind moving through the branches. It is time to hear the legend of the White Doe. To understand the legend, we must first picture the child. Virginia Dare, born August 18, 1587, when her grandfather, John White, left the island. She was 9 days old. A tiny, fragile life wrapped in English linen, sleeping in a rough wooden crib on the edge of a savage continent. History loses her there. But folklore picks her up. The legend imagines her survival. It imagines her growing up among the Croatoan people. It imagines a girl with pale skin and golden hair, running through the cypress swamps, speaking the Algonquin tongue, wearing deerskin, hunting with a bow. She's a creature of two worlds. The White Doe metaphor begins here. She stands out against the dark forest like a beacon. She is wild, yet she carries the ghost of a civilization she does not remember. In the story, she is beautiful. So beautiful that she catches the eye of a powerful figure. Sometimes he is a native sorcerer named Chico. Sometimes he is a spirit of the land. This figure represents the jealousy of the New World. He wants to possess her. He wants to wipe away the English part of her soul and make her fully his. But Virginia falls in love with a noble warrior named Akisco. A man of honor. The sorcerer, enraged by her refusal, casts a spell. He throws a magic skin over her shoulders. And in an instant, the woman is gone. In her place stands a deer. Pure white, albino, a ghost moving on 4 legs. She bounds away into the forest. Lost to her lover, lost to her people, trapped in the body of a beast. Think of the psychology of this story. Why a deer? Deer are silent. They are prey. They are beautiful, but they are hunted. Perhaps this legend is the way the survivors explained what happened to the women of the colony. They were silenced. They were taken. They lost their voices and became part of the landscape. To become a deer is to lose your human identity. It is to become wild. For the colonists back in England, hearing rumors of a white doe would be easier than hearing the truth. It turns a tragedy of starvation and assimilation into a tragedy of magic. It makes it poetic, but poetry often hides pain. The legend continues. And the ending is where the true weight of the history lies. Virginia Dare, now the White Doe, roams the islands. She is often seen at twilight, standing on the dunes, looking out at the ocean. Looking for the ships that never come, hunters try to catch her. But she is too fast. She is a spirit. Ordinary arrows pass right through her. Only a specific counter curse can save her. Her lover. Akisco learns that a magic arrow, sometimes tipped with pearl, sometimes with silver, can reverse the spell. If he hits her with this arrow, she will not die. She will turn back into a woman, but there is another hunter. A wicked man. A man who wants the glory of killing the ghost deer. He also learns of the silver arrow. Both men hunt her. Imagine the mist rising off the Roanoke Sound. The moon is full. The White Doe steps into a clearing to drink from a dark pool of water. 2 bowstrings hum at the exact same moment. 2 silver arrows fly through the air. 1 arrow is shot with love, intended to save. The other arrow is shot with greed, intended to kill. They both strike the heart of the White Doe at the same instant. A cloud of smoke covers the clearing. A cry echoes through the trees, half human, half animal. When the smoke clears, the deer is gone. Lying on the moss is the body of Virginia Dare. She is a woman again. But she is dead. The silver arrow that was meant to save her arrived too late, or was tangled with the arrow meant to kill her. She dies in the arms of her lover. And as her blood soaks into the earth, a spring of sweet water bubbles up from the ground. It is said that the Scuppernong grapevines, the twisted, wild grapes that grow all over Roanoke, turned red from that day on. They drank the blood of the English child. Why does this story endure? Why do mothers tell it to their children in North Carolina 400 years later? Because it captures the guilt of the abandonment. The silver arrow represents the English attempts to save the colony. John White tried to come back. The Empire tried to send ships. But the greed arrow represents the delays. The politics. The wars with Spain that kept the ships in port. The help arrived too late. And in the attempt to reclaim the colony, they only found a corpse. The legend tells us that you cannot reverse assimilation. You cannot turn the deer back into the woman. Once the wilderness has taken you, you belong to the wilderness. But here is the most haunting part of the lore. The story didn't end in 1591. For centuries, people living on the Outer Banks have reported seeing a white deer, not an albino deer, which has pink eyes and is sickly, but a radiant, snow-white doe with intelligent, SAD eyes. Sightings often happen near the mother vine, the oldest grapevine in America, which still grows on Roanoke Island. It is 400 years old. It was alive when Virginia Dare was born, rangers in the parks, tourists driving late at night, fishermen in the early dawn. They all tell the same story, a flash of white in the headlights. A silent figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching. And then ... dawn, vanished without a sound, without a snapped twig. Is it a ghost? Or is it a genetic echo? Biologists will tell you that white deer exist. But folklore experts will tell you that a recurring ghost story is a sign of unfinished business. The White Doe appears when the island is threatened. She appears before storms. She appears to remind us that the land remembers. When you walk the trails of Fort Raleigh National Historic Site today, the air feels different. It is heavy. The Spanish moss hangs like curtains, obscuring your view. You feel watched. It is a gentle feeling, but sad. If you see a deer on the island, you are supposed to whisper, "Virginia." And if the deer stops, if it turns its head and looks at you with a human recognition, then you know that the first daughter of the colony never left. She is still waiting for her grandfather. She is still waiting for the ship. She is trapped in the loop of the legend, pacing the shores of the world that forgot her. The folklore is not a lie. It is a container for the spirit. John White died in Ireland, miles away from his family. He never knew the story of the White Doe. He never knew that his granddaughter had become the queen of the forest, but perhaps in his dreams he saw her. Perhaps that is why the colony is called Lost. Not because we don't know where they went, but because they transformed into something we can no longer recognize. Now let the legend fade back into the mist. The fire in the forest is dying down to embers. The storyteller's voice becomes a whisper. You are safe here. You are not lost, but as you drift towards sleep, let your mind borrow the freedom of the White Doe. Imagine you are shedding the weight of your day. You are shedding the heavy clothes of responsibility. You are becoming light. You are becoming silent. You are stepping into a cool, dark forest. The ground is soft moss under your feet. The air smells of pine needles and salt water. You move without effort. You float through the trees. The moon is your guide. It shines through the canopy, painting the forest floor in silver and shadow. You are watching the world from a place of perfect peace. No one can catch you. No one can hurt you. You are part of the wild magic now. The mystery of Roanoke is not something to be solved tonight. It is just a story woven into the roots of the trees. Resting under the earth, let the white deer guide you deeper into the woods of sleep, down the path of dreams, past the old oak trees, past the sleeping river. Everything is quiet. The birds are sleeping. The wind has stopped. There is only the soft rhythm of your breathing, in and out, like the tide. Rest now. The island is sleeping. The doe is sleeping. And so are you. We are always told the story of Roanoke from the English perspective. We see the anxious father, John White, returning to find his family gone. But we forget that there were other eyes watching that coast. Eyes that did not want to save the colonists, but to slaughter them. The Spanish Empire knew about Roanoke. To King Philip II of Spain, the English colony wasn't a settlement. It was a pirate's nest. It was a cancer on the coast of La Florida that had to be cut out. In 1588, 2 years before John White returned, a Spanish warship silently approached the Outer Banks. Their orders were clear: locate the English heretics, burn their fort, and put every man, woman, and child to the sword. They arrived ready for war. They loaded their cannons. They sharpened their steel. But when the Spanish spies rowed ashore under the cover of darkness, Expecting a fight, they found something that terrified them more than an army. They found absolute nothingness. No bodies, no fires, no surrender. Just the wind howling through empty barrels. The Spanish fled not because they were beaten, but because they believed the land itself had swallowed their enemy. This is the truth the king buried ... now ... Let the maps of war roll up. Let the sound of the cannons fade into the rhythmic crashing of the waves. We are drifting away from the noise of empires. We are moving into the silence of the sea. Imagine you are standing on the deck of a great wooden galleon. It is night. The stars are bright and cold above you. The ship rocks gently, side to side, cradled by the Atlantic. Creak ... splash. Creak ... the air smells of salt and old rope. We are traveling back to the year 1588. We are sailing with the Spanish Captain Vicente Gonzalez. We are looking for a city that isn't there. Lean against the railing. Watch the dark water pass by. The mystery is waiting on the shore to understand the silence of the Spanish spies. We must first understand the noise of the Spanish court. Let us travel mentally to the Escorial, the massive, gloomy palace of King Philip II, outside of Madrid. It is a place of gray stone and religious silence. King Philip sat in a small room, reading reports from his spies in London. He was the most powerful man on earth. His empire stretched from the Andes to the Philippines, but he was worried about a tiny speck of land in North America. His spies told him that the English, his hated rivals, had established a foothold. They called it Virginia. To Philip, this was an insult. The Pope had divided the world, and North America belonged to Spain. The presence of English settlers was not just illegal. It was a spiritual threat. So he gave the order. Find them. Destroy them. He didn't send a massive armada initially. He sent a scout, a hunter. Captain Vicente Gonzalez. Gonzalez was a man of the sea. He knew the currents of the Atlantic better than any Englishman. He was given a fast ship, a Zabra, designed to navigate shallow waters. His mission was secret. He was to sail up the coast, find the hidden English bay, and map it for the invasion fleet that would follow. Imagine the tension on that ship. The Spanish sailors believed the English were powerful sorcerers and pirates. They expected a fortress. They expected heavy cannons guarding the inlet. As they sailed north from St. Augustine in modern-day Florida, the coast became wilder. The maps ran out. They were sailing into the unknown. For days they saw nothing but sand dunes and pine trees. The great American wilderness. It was a wall of green. But then they found signs, driftwood floating in the water that looked like it had been cut with an axe. Smoke rising in the distance. The crew tightened their grip on their weapons. They were getting close. The psychology of a soldier before a battle is a strange thing. There is fear, yes, but there is also adrenaline. You prepare yourself for the noise. You prepare yourself for the violence, but nothing prepares you for the silence. It was June of 1588, a hot, humid summer on the coast. Gonzalez steered his ship towards a gap in the barrier islands. He recognized the geography from stolen English maps. This was it. The entrance to the Roanoke Sound. They lowered the longboats. The oars dipped silently into the black water. Dip ... pull. Dip ... The soldiers wore steel breastplates that glinted in the moonlight. They held their arquebuses, early muskets, ready. They expected a sentry to fire a warning shot. They expected a shout, but there was only the sound of the birds. They reached the shore. The sand was white and pristine. Gonzalez stepped onto the beach. He looked for footprints. He looked for the tracks of boots. There were none. He led his men inland through the maritime forest. The live oaks twisted above them like frozen lightning. The Spanish moss brushed against their helmets. They found the slipway, the place where the English dragged their boats ashore. They found barrels, half buried in the sand, aimed at collecting rainwater. But the barrels were dry. The wood was cracking. They moved closer to where the settlement should be. They expected to smell smoke, cooking fires, unwashed bodies. Instead, they smelled nothing. Just pine needles and salt air. They found the fort. But it wasn't the bustling military base they had been promised. It was a shell. The palisade walls were there, standing tall and gray. But the gates were open. The Spanish spies entered the fort with their weapons raised, spinning around, checking the corners. Where are they? Is it a trap? Are they in the trees? This is the terror of the empty room. If the enemy is there, you can fight him. If the enemy is gone, your mind begins to invent him. Gonzalez and his men searched the area. They found no bodies, no graves, no messages carved for them, for the Croatoan sign was meant for John White. Not for them, or perhaps they couldn't read it in the dark. They realized the truth. The English hadn't just left. They had been gone for a long time. The fort was already being reclaimed by nature. Vines were creeping up the logs. Birds were nesting in the watchtower. To the Spanish, this was deeply unsettling. They were religious men. They believed in divine intervention. Did God strike the heretics down? Did the land eat them? Gonzalez returned to his ship, confused. He had come to kill a dragon, and he found an empty cave. Here is one of the great ironies of history, a detail that makes you wonder about fate. Vicente Gonzalez was at Roanoke in June 1588. John White tried to return in 1588, but was stopped by pirates and forced back. He didn't make it until 1590. The Spanish were there between the English visits, if the colonists had still been there. If they had waited just a few months longer before moving inland to the Diamond Fort, the Spanish would have found them, and they would have killed them all. In a strange, twisted way, the disappearance saved them from the Spanish sword. By vanishing into the woods, by going Croatoan, they avoided the massacre that King Philip had planned. But Gonzalez didn't know this. He sailed further up the coast. He looked for them in the Chesapeake Bay. He looked for them in the rivers. But the land was vast, and the English were small. He eventually turned back. He sailed back to St. Augustine and wrote a report to the king. "The English are gone," he wrote. "The coast is clear." This report is why Spain never colonized North Carolina. They believed the land was cursed. They believed it was uninhabitable. They focused their efforts south, in Florida and north. To keep an eye on things, they left the middle Virginia coast alone. Because of the report of the spies who found nothing. The land was left empty for the next wave of English settlers to arrive at Jamestown. 20 years later, the silence of Roanoke shaped the map of America. If Gonzalez had found them, if he had established a Spanish fort there, the United States might speak Spanish today. But the nothingness turned him away. Back in Spain, King Philip read the report. He was not relieved. He was paranoid. Where did they go? A king does not like loose ends. A missing enemy is more dangerous than a dead enemy. For years, Spanish maps continued to mark the spot. They marked it not as a colony, but as a hazard. They believed the English were hiding inland, waiting, building strength. And in a way, they were right. If we believe the Dare Stones and the Diamond Fort theory, the colonists were indeed inland, living their lives. Hidden from the sea, the Spanish spies had stood on the beach, looking west into the sunset. The colonists were perhaps only 50 miles away, looking east, two civilizations. Separated by a wall of trees and fear, the Spanish soldiers who walked that beach that night reported feeling a strange heaviness. They wanted to leave. They felt that they were trespassing in a graveyard. It brings us back to the atmosphere of the Outer Banks. It is a place of shifting sands. Islands appear and disappear with hurricanes. It is a place where solid ground is an illusion. The Spanish, who were used to stone castles and dry plains, found this water world terrifying. They left no mark. They burned nothing, because there was nothing to burn. They simply sailed away, leaving the ghosts to their silence. Now. Let us stand on the deck of the Spanish ship one last time. The investigation is over. The soldiers are asleep below deck. The cannons are cold. You are alone with the ocean. Watch the wake of the ship, the white foam churning in the moonlight, stretching back towards the horizon. The land of Roanoke is fading into the darkness behind you. It is just a black line between the sea and the sky. The mystery is safe there. The spies could not find it. The king could not destroy it. Some things are meant to remain hidden. Some things are meant to belong to the night. Feel the gentle roll of the ship. Rock. And return, rock. And return. Your breathing matches the rhythm of the waves. Slow, deep, peaceful. You are drifting away from the questions. You are drifting into the calm waters of sleep. The map is blank here. There are no enemies. There are no spies. Only the stars guiding you to rest. Let the history dissolve. Let the centuries melt away. You are floating in the velvet darkness. Safe, unfound. Sleep now. The ocean will keep watch. We look at history as a series of accidents. We think the colonists of Roanoke ran out of food or got lost or died of disease. We refuse to accept the darker possibility that they were payment. There is a theory, whispered by the oldest keepers of the Appalachian lore, that the Roanoke colony was not a settlement, it was a harvest. The land of the New World was not empty. It was occupied by entities far older than the British Empire. Entities that required a toll for the right to exist on their soil. The disappearance of 115 people wasn't a tragedy of errors. It was the closing of a transaction. The native tribes knew the rules. They knew which forest to avoid. They knew where the hungry earth lay. But the English walked blindly into a sanctuary of the old gods. They didn't vanish because they were lost. They vanished because they were collected. The Croatoan wasn't a tribe. It was the name of the collector. And the fences were left standing because the livestock inside didn't panic. They went willingly. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the fear dissolve into the mist. We are safe here behind the veil of time. The shadows in the room are just shadows. The wind outside is just the wind. Let us retreat to the safety of the archives. Imagine a room lined with dark wood, filled with the comforting smell of old paper and leather bindings. A single candle burns on the desk, casting a warm, golden circle of light. We are going to open a book that has no title. We are going to read the pages that were written not in ink, but in the patterns of the forest itself. Relax your shoulders. Breathe in the scent of the ancient pines. We are going to walk the path of the harvest. To understand the harvest theory, we must first look at the environment of Roanoke Island. In 1587, the accounts of the first explorers described the land as rich and bountiful. Grapes growing in the sand, deer that did not run from men, birds so numerous they darkened the sky, but there is a detail that often gets overlooked in the diaries. The silence. There were moments. recorded by Thomas Harriot and others, where the forest would go completely silent. The birds would stop singing. The crickets would stop chirping. The wind would die down. In modern forestry and hunting circles, this is known as the Oz effect. It is the feeling that nature has held its breath. It usually happens when a predator is near a bear or a wolf, but on Roanoke, the silence lasted for days. The harvest theory suggests that the ecosystem of the island was not natural in the way we understand it. It was a managed garden. That the gardener was not human. The 115 colonists built their cottages. They planted their English wheat. They tried to impose order on a landscape that operated on a different set of rules. They were invasive species, and like any invasive species, the ecosystem reacted to them. Imagine the colonists sleeping in their beds, the woods pressing in against the wooden walls, the feeling of being watched by 10,000 eyes that do not blink. They weren't being hunted in the traditional sense. They were being ripened. The lack of bodies is the key evidence here. If a tribe attacks, they leave bodies. If a disease strikes, there are graves. But in a harvest, nothing is wasted. When a farmer harvests a crop, he takes everything. He clears the field. The scene John White found the empty houses. The scattered goods, the lack of bones mimics a field after the reaper has passed through. The crop, the people, was removed. The chaff, the armor, the books, the heavy chests was left behind. It was a systematic removal of biological matter. How do you get 115 people to leave their fortress without a fight? There were soldiers there, men trained to kill, men with muskets. Yet there are no bullet holes in the palisade, no hacked timber. The harvest theory posits that they weren't taken by force. They were called. There is a phenomenon known as the call of the void, the urge to jump from a high place, the urge to walk into the dark ocean. In the folklore of the Algonquian peoples, there are spirits that can mimic the voices of loved ones. Spirits that can sing a song so beautiful that a man will walk out of his warm house into the freezing snow and never look back. Imagine the nights leading up to the disappearance. The colonists are starving. They are terrified. Their minds are fragile. Then the sound begins. Maybe it sounded like a ship's bell ringing in the distance. Maybe it sounded like John White calling their names. Maybe it sounded like angels. One by one, they opened the gates. They didn't run. They walked. They walked out of the safety of the fort, past the cannons that could not protect them from a sound, and into the tree line. This explains the dinner table set. Detail. If you are eating and you hear a fire alarm, you run. You knock over the chair. You drop the spoon. But if you hear a mesmerizing song, a hypnotic command, you might simply stand up. You might place your spoon gently on the table. You might walk out the door in a trance. The orderliness of the scene is not a sign of peace. It is a sign of control. They were under a spell. A mass psychosis induced by the entity of the woods. The Croatoan carving was not a message of distress. It was the name of the song. The colonists were assimilating into the collective consciousness of the forest. They were shedding their individuality. We must consider the Native American perspective, which is often dismissed as superstition by Western historians. The tribes of the region spoke of great spirits that owned the land. They made offerings, tobacco, deer meat. They maintained a balance. They respected the boundaries. The English did not respect the boundaries. They dug into the earth. They cut the trees. They claimed ownership. In doing so, they broke the pact. And when you break a pact with an ancient entity, a debt is created. The harvest theory suggests that the 115 colonists were the back pay. They were the payment required to balance the scales for the intrusion. This is why the local tribes didn't help them. Mateo, the friendly chief, might have known. He might have watched from a distance, sad but resigned. He knew that the land demanded a sacrifice. To interfere would be to bring the wrath of the entity upon his own people. So he let the harvest happen. He let the woods take them. This creates a terrifying picture of the New World. Not a land of opportunity, but a land of transaction. You give blood, you get land. The colony failed because they tried to take without giving, and so the land took for itself. Where did they go? If you dig in the soil of Roanoke, you find roots. The live oaks of North Carolina are ancient. Some of them are 500, 600 years old. They were saplings. When Virginia Dare was born, there is a sub-theory within the harvest lore that is particularly beautiful and haunting. It says they didn't die. They were integrated. The biochemistry of the forest absorbed them. Imagine the colonists walking into the deep woods, lying down on the soft moss and simply sinking the roots wrapping around them. Not to crush, but to connect their consciousness, joining the network of the mycelium, the fungal network that connects the entire forest. They became the eyes of the trees. They became the voice of the wind. This is why the White Doe legend exists. It is a fragmented memory of this transformation. A human soul inside a forest creature. It explains why people today feel watched in those woods. You are being watched by the ancestors of the colony, who are now part of the architecture of the island. They are the bark. They are the leaves. They are the silence. It is a form of immortality. Not the heaven they preached about in their church, but an earthly immortality. A return to the carbon cycle. The harvest wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of recycling. The entity looked at the starving, desperate English people and said, "Your experiment has failed. Return to me." And they did. This theory does not end in 1587 every year. People go missing in the national parks of North America. Experienced hikers, children, hunters, they vanish without a trace. No blood, no tracks. Search dogs refuse to pick up the scent. Are these modern harvests? Is the pact still active? The Roanoke Colony might have been the first mass event, but perhaps the entity still requires a tithe now and then. When you walk in the woods and you feel that sudden silence, that as effect, it is a warning. It is the gardener walking through the rows, checking the crop. Most of us are ignored. We are not ripe, but sometimes someone is taken. A straggler, a lone walker, and they are never found. Or if they are found in places that are impossible to reach. With no memory of how they got there, the Roanoke nightmare is the grandmother of all these stories. It is the original missing 411 case. It teaches us a lesson that we constantly forget in our modern, technological cities. We do not own the wild. The wild owns us. We are guests. And if we overstay our welcome, or if we forget to pay the toll, we become part of the inventory. But tonight, you are not in the wild. You are in your sanctuary. The walls around you are solid. The doors are locked. You can let go of the fear of the harvest. Instead, take comfort in the idea of connection. The colonists did not suffer. The harvest is a gentle process. It is the laying down of burdens. Imagine the relief of John White's daughter, Eleanor, after years of struggle, hunger, and fear, to simply lie down in the cool, soft moss, to close her eyes, to let the great, strong roots of the earth hold her. To stop fighting. To become one with the green, quiet world. It is a deep sleep. The deepest sleep imaginable. Let your own body feel heavy now, like a stone sinking into soft earth. Let your thoughts tangle with the roots of dreams. Let the silence of the room wrap around you like a protective blanket. The woods are vast and dark, but they are also a cradle. The mystery is over. The transaction is complete. The trees are standing guard over the sleepers. Drift away now, into the quiet, into the deep. Sleep. We are taught that the Lost Colony vanished without a trace. We are taught they were wiped out by war or starvation. But the most damning evidence that they survived has been staring us in the face for centuries. It isn't found in a book. It isn't found in the ground. It is found in the eyes of a people who were never supposed to exist. In 1701. Over a century after the disappearance, an explorer named John Lawson walked into the deep interior of North Carolina. He expected to find untouched indigenous tribes. Instead, he found the Hatteras Indians. And when they looked at him, he froze. They didn't have the dark eyes of the native nations. They had gray eyes. They had blue eyes. They had auburn hair. And they spoke a dialect of English that hadn't been heard in London since the days of Shakespeare. The colonists didn't disappear. They were absorbed. Their bloodline didn't end. It went underground. For 300 years, the government tried to classify these people, deny their heritage, and bury their history. But you cannot lie to biology. The DNA of the Roanoke settlers is still alive today, walking among us, a living, breathing ghost story that proves the king lied. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the shock of the discovery fade. Let the noise of the modern world recede. We are no longer analyzing data. We are listening to the rhythm of the blood. Imagine a quiet laboratory late at night. The hum of the machines is a gentle drone. A microscope sits on a wooden desk, illuminated by a soft lamp. We are looking down the lens, past the skin, past the history books, into the very double helix of life. We are traveling back down the river of generations, back to a time when two worlds collided in the dark woods and a new people were born. Relax your body. Let your heartbeat slow down. We are going to trace the invisible thread of ancestry. To understand the magnitude of this anomaly, we must walk in the boots of John Lawson. The year is 1701. It has been 114 years since. John White left his daughter Eleanor on Roanoke Island. The colony is a myth, a campfire story. Most people in England believe they were slaughtered by savages within weeks of being abandoned. John Lawson is a surveyor. He is mapping the interior of the Carolinas, a place that was, at that time, as mysterious as the moon. He travels deeper than anyone has gone before. He crosses swamps where the cypress knees stand like tombstones. He pushes through the dense pine barrens. He arrives at a settlement near the Lumber River. He expects to need a translator. He expects a culture completely alien to his own, but as he enters the village, he notices the architecture. The houses are not traditional wigwams. They have stone foundations. They have distinct rooms. And then the people emerge. Lawson writes in his journal that he was astonished. Standing before him were people with Eurocentric features. High cheekbones, yes, but also light skin that freckled in the sun. And those haunting, impossible eyes, blue, gray, green. In 1701. In the interior of America, blue eyes were a biological impossibility unless there had been contact. And then they didn't speak the Algonquin trade language. They spoke English, but it was strange. It was rhythmic. It used words that Lawson recognized from old books, words like mot for might, And Ax for Ask. It was the frozen language of 1587. Imagine the feeling of that moment. It is like finding a dinosaur alive in a hidden valley. Lawson asked them who they were. They didn't call themselves English. They called themselves Hatteras or later Lumbee, but they told him a story. They said their ancestors were white people who could talk in a book. They said a great ship had left them, and they had moved inland to live with the friendly tribes. This is the smoking gun. The talking in a book refers to literacy. The Bible, the books John White left behind. Lawson recorded this. He wrote it down, but when he sent his report to London, it was largely ignored. Why? Because the Empire didn't want a mixed-race success story? They wanted a story of conquest or a story of tragedy. They didn't know what to do with the story of assimilation. So, the blue-eyed tribe was left alone in the swamps, keeping the genetic secret safe for another 2 centuries. Biology is one way to trace a people. Names are another. When the Lost Colony disappeared, they left behind a roster. A list of the 115 men, women, and children, names like Dare White, Sampson Berry, Lucas Cooper in the 1800s and 1900s. Census takers began to document the families of the Lumbee tribe and the Catawba Nation, the very tribes living in the area where the Diamond Fort was located. When you look at the census rolls of these tribes, you get a chill down your spine. The names match. Over 40% of the surnames found in the Lumbee tribe today correspond directly to the surnames of the lost colonists. This is not a coincidence. You cannot have a statistical overlap that high by accident. The Sampsons of the Lumbee tribe are the descendants of the Sampsons of Roanoke. The Berries are the Berries. The Dares are the Dares. Think of the resilience of a name. A name is a fragile thing. It can be changed. It can be forgotten, but these families held on to their names like treasures. For 300 years, living in the swamps, isolated from white society, isolated from other tribes, they kept their fathers' names. Why? Because Eleanor Dare had told them to, because they knew that one day someone might come looking. And the name was the only proof of who they were. We are the Dares. It was a password passed down from father to son, mother to daughter. A secret handshake across the centuries. Historians often dismiss oral history. They say memory fades, but names are sticky. Names are identity. The fact that these names survived alongside the blue eyes creates a dual verification. Biology. Language equals truth. They didn't die. They just moved. Let us look at the science of the eyes. Blue eyes are a recessive trait. In genetics, this means both parents must carry the gene for the child to show the color. If a blue-eyed Englishman marries a brown-eyed Native American, their children will likely have brown eyes. The blue gene hides. It becomes a carrier gene for blue eyes to resurface in a population to be as common as Lawson saw them in. 1701 something specific must happen. There must be a lot of carriers. This tells us something crucial about the fate of the colony. It wasn't just 1 or 2 survivors who were captured. It was the majority for the blue eyes to persist for 4 generations until Lawson arrived. A significant number of the 115 colonists must have survived and intermarried within a specific group. They created a genetic bottleneck. They moved inland, perhaps to the Diamond Fort area, and they lived there for decades. They married the local Croatoans, yes, but they also married each other. They kept the gene pool concentrated enough that the blue eyes didn't wash away in the sea of history. This implies a stable, functioning society. It implies that the Lost Colony wasn't a desperate group of refugees running through the woods. It was a functioning town. A hybrid town, a place where English iron tools were used alongside stone arrowheads. A place where the Bible was read alongside the smoking of the peace pipe. A place where children were sung to sleep with Elizabethan lullabies and Algonquin chants. It was the first true American melting pot. A century before the United States existed, and because it was mixed, it was ignored. In the 1800s. During the era of racial segregation, the Lumbee faced a terrible struggle. They were not white, they were not black, they were Indians, but they had blue eyes and spoke English. The government didn't know what to do with them. They were a Tier 1 anomaly, a glitch in the system of racial classification. So they were pushed to the margins. They were left in the swamps, and in that isolation, the DNA was preserved. The swamp acted as a preservative jar, keeping the bloodline pure enough to be tested today. Now, fast forward to the 21st century. We live in the age of the swab. We can mail a drop of saliva to a lab and receive a map of our ancestors. Commercial. DNA testing has exploded, the Roanoke mystery wide open. Thousands of people in North Carolina, people who grew up hearing family legends that they were descended from the lost ones, finally got proof. The results showed a specific mixture. Indigenous American markers combined with distinct British markers from the 1500s, but more interestingly, they found markers from the Mediterranean. Why is this important? Because among the lost colonists, there were not just English. There were mercenaries. There were men who had sailed with Drake. There were likely Sephardic Jews and Moors who had converted. The DNA of the Lumbee people shows traces of these specific rare lineages. It is a genetic fingerprint that matches the manifest of the 1587 voyage. Perfectly. The science has caught up to the folklore. The blue-eyed tribe wasn't a myth. It was a biological reality. This realization brings a sense of profound peace. It means that the story of Roanoke is not a story of death. It is a story of survival. It means that Virginia Dare, the White Doe, the little baby born in the wilderness, she likely lived. She grew up. She fell in love. She had children. And those children had children. And today, her great-granddaughter might be a teacher in Raleigh, or a nurse in Charlotte, or a farmer in Pembroke. She might not know her name is Dare, but she carries the blue eyes. She carries the resilience. The blood remembers what the history books forgot. As we come to the end of this chapter, let us visualize the flow of time. Imagine a great river. It starts as a small stream in the mountains. The colony of 1587. It flows down towards the ocean. But then it meets another river, the Croatoan people. The two waters crash together. They swirl. They mix. For a moment, you can see the two colors separate. The blue of the English, the brown of the earth. But as the river flows on, the colors merge. They become one new water, stronger, deeper. This is the river that flows through the veins of America. We are all mixtures. We are all survivors of some ancient collision. Your own DNA holds secrets just as deep. You carry the memories of thousands of ancestors who survived winters, wars, and journeys across the dark seas. You are the result of their survival. Let that thought comfort you. You are not alone in this room. You are a vessel for an ancient story. The blue eyes of the Lumbee are watching over the night. They are the stars in the canopy of the forest. The mystery is solved. The lost are found. They are us. Feel your body relaxing into the flow of the river. Drifting downstream. Past the cypress trees. Past the old forts. Past the stones. There is no conflict here. Only the quiet hum of life continuing. The king tried to bury the truth, but the blood kept it safe. Rest now. The ancestors are at peace. And so are you. Sleep. We are told that archaeology is the search for truth. We are told that when we find a piece of the past, we polish it, we put it in a museum, and we rewrite the history books. But in the case of the Lost Colony, the opposite happened. We found them. We held their belongings in our hands. And then we were told to put them back. In 1998 on Hatteras Island, a team of archaeologists unearthed a 10-carat gold signet ring. It was Elizabethan. It featured a lion crest, a symbol of English nobility. It was found in a layer of soil that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that the Roanoke survivors had lived there peacefully for decades. But this discovery didn't make the front page. It didn't change the textbooks. Why? Because a lost colony is a mystery that sells millions of dollars in tickets. A found colony is just a history lesson. The evidence of their survival was inconvenient for the narrative of the mystery. So the digging stopped. The funding was cut, and the truth was shoveled back into the dark earth, reburied to keep the legend profitable. This is the truth the king and the tourist board buried ... now ... Let the anger of the cover-up settle like dust after a storm. Let the noise of the politics fade away. We are returning to the quiet of the excavation site. Imagine a dig site at twilight. The air is cooling down. The tools, trowels, brushes, sieves are laid out in neat rows. The smell of damp earth is rich and grounding. We are kneeling in the dirt, brushing away the sand of 4 centuries. Scrape ... Scrape ... brush. We are looking for the small, hard things that survive when flesh and wood are gone. We are looking for the truth that cannot speak, but shines in the lantern light. To understand the tragedy of the reburial, we must first appreciate the joy of the discovery. Travel back with me to 1998. The location is Hatteras Island, 50 miles south of Roanoke. This is the place the colonists said they were going. Croatoan. For centuries, no one bothered to dig there seriously. Everyone was obsessed with the fort on Roanoke Island. They were looking for the place where the colonists left. Not the place where they arrived, but a team from East Carolina University decided to look at the destination. They chose a site near an ancient Native American village, a place where the Croatoan people had lived for 1,000 years. The digging was slow. Archaeology is a game of millimeters. You peel back the earth like the pages of a book. Layer 1, modern trash. Layer 2, Civil War bullets. Layer 3, colonial pottery from the 1700s, and then the layer of contact. The late 1500s. Normally, in a Native American village from this time, you find arrowheads. You find bone tools. You find clay pottery. But the team found something else. They found a gun lock. The mechanism from a 16th century Snap-on's musket. Think about that object. A musket is a high-tech weapon for 1587. It is complex. It requires maintenance. Finding a gun lock in a native village implies one of 2 things: trade or presence. But then, they found the ring. It was small, gold, engraved with a lion prancing. This was not a trade item. You trade beads, you trade copper. You trade knives, you do not trade your family crest. You do not trade a gold signet ring that is used to seal legal documents. A man only takes off his signet ring when he dies, or when he passes it to his son. Finding that ring in the dirt was like finding a fingerprint. It proved that a high-status Englishman lived and likely died among the Croatoan people. It was the smoking gun. The colonists had done exactly what they said they would do. They went to Croatoan. They lived there. They kept their jewelry. They kept their guns. The mystery was solved. Or so the archaeologists thought. Here is where the story shifts from science to silence. You would expect a press conference. You would expect a rewriting of American history. The colony was never lost. But that didn't happen. Instead, a strange fog descended over the findings. Arguments began. Maybe the ring was traded, the skeptics said. Maybe it was washed up from a shipwreck. But rings don't wash up from shipwrecks and bury themselves in the exact stratigraphic layer of a village. The pushback wasn't scientific. It was narrative. Roanoke Island relies on the Lost Colony. It is a massive industry. There is an outdoor drama that has been running for 80 years, telling the tragic story of the disappearance. There are museums. There are souvenir shops. The word Lost is the brand. If you change the headline to The Moved Colony, the romance dies. If they just moved down the street and lived happily ever after with the neighbors, where is the tragedy? Where is the ghost story? The mystery is worth more than the solution. Funding for the Hatteras dig began to dry up. Permits became harder to get. The site itself, the sacred ground where the survivors likely built their new homes, was not preserved as a national monument. Instead, development continued. Vacation homes, roads, the archaeological evidence was effectively quietly reburied, not by the archaeologists who wanted to scream the truth, but by the inertia of a society that prefers a good legend over a complex reality. Let us look at the other items that were found. The ones that get even less attention than the ring. They found copper. Now, Native Americans used copper, but they pounded it flat. The copper found at the Hatteras site was drawn. It was European wire. They found lead shot bullets, but they had been flattened, pounded into pencils. This is a beautiful, intimate detail. Why turn a bullet into a pencil? Because you don't need to shoot anyone anymore? You are safe. But you still want to write? You want to teach your children the alphabet? You want to draw a map. The simple artifact of flattened lead bullet tells us about the daily life of the survivors. It tells us they were adapting. They were turning weapons into tools of communication. It paints a picture of peace. Imagine the English settlers sitting by the fire with the Croatoan families, melting down their lead, making things. It is a story of harmony, but harmony doesn't sell tickets like horror does. So the lead pencil sits in a storage box in a dark room, labeled and filed away. Sleeping. There is another site. A site near the Albemarle Sound, the site of the diamond fort we spoke of earlier. Archaeologists found borderware pottery there, the specific ceramic of the colonists. But do you know what sits on top of some of the most promising land in that area? Golf courses, luxury subdivisions. This is the ultimate form of reburial. We pour concrete over the past. We lay down sod and manicured grass over the graves of the first Americans. It is not a malicious conspiracy in the sense of a secret meeting in a dark room. It is the conspiracy of indifference. The developer wants to build. The town wants the tax revenue. The historian standing in front of the bulldozer, waving a piece of pottery, is a nuisance. It's just a pot shard, they say, but that shard is the voice of a woman who cooked dinner for her starving family in 1588. The silence of the reburied evidence is deafening. We have the answers. They are just under the grass, but we lack the will to look, because looking might inconvenience the present. But here is the comforting thought to carry you into sleep. The earth is a patient keeper. We might stop digging. We might build roads. We might look away, but the artifacts are not gone. The gold ring with the lion crest is safe. Whether it is in a museum drawer or still in the ground, it exists. The truth does not require our acknowledgement to be true. The colonists lived. They loved. They survived. They merged with the land. The reburial of the evidence is, in a way, a return to the natural state. Imagine the artifacts sleeping in the soil, wrapped in the cool, dark blanket of the earth. They are resting. Just like you are about to rest, there is no urgency. The story waited 400 years. It can wait another 400. The spirits of the colonists are not angry. They know who they are. They know where they went. Let the modern world fight over its narratives and its ticket sales. We know the secret. We know that beneath the noise, beneath the golf courses, beneath the sand dunes, the evidence is there: a lead pencil, a gold ring, a copper wire, silent witnesses to a life that continued against all odds. Let your mind drift down into that quiet darkness, down into the layers of the earth. It is peaceful there. No light, no sound, just the weight of history holding you. You are found. You are safe. Sleep now. We like to believe that the British Empire was a force of exploration, driven by a noble desire to discover. But the truth is, the empire was a business. And in the ledger of Queen Elizabeth and King James, the 115 souls of Roanoke were written off as a bad investment. The official story is that the war with Spain prevented a rescue. They say the ships were tied up fighting the Armada, but that war ended. The ships sailed again, yet no massive rescue fleet was ever sent to North Carolina. Why? Because the existence of the colony had become a political liability. Sir Walter Raleigh, the man who funded them, fell from grace. He was imprisoned and eventually beheaded. His colony was his legacy, and the crown wanted it erased. They didn't stop searching because they couldn't find them. They stopped searching because finding them would have been inconvenient. The Lost Colony wasn't lost. It was redacted. It was the first cover-up in American history. A decision made in a stone room in London to let over 100 men, women, and children rot in the wilderness rather than risk a diplomatic incident. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the cold winds of politics blow over. We are leaving the court of kings. We are leaving the noise of the executioner's block. Imagine a room filled with dust motes dancing in the light of a high window. We are in the royal archives. Thousands of scrolls are stacked on shelves that reach the ceiling. The smell of sealing wax and old ink fills the air. We are going to pull out a specific scroll, a dispatch from the year 1604. We are going to read the silence between the lines. Relax your mind. Let the history wash over you like a slow tide. We are going to understand why the ships never came back. To understand why the search was abandoned, we must look at the man who started it all. Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh was the golden boy of Queen Elizabeth's court. He was dashing. He was rich. He was the one who poured his own fortune into the Roanoke expedition. To the colonists, he was their savior. They believed in him. They believed that as long as Raleigh was alive, he would never let them die. But in the courts of Europe, power is a slippery thing. When Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, the world changed overnight. Her cousin, James I of Scotland, took the throne. King James hated Raleigh. He saw him as a warmonger, a pirate, and a threat. Within months of the new king's coronation, Raleigh was arrested for treason. He was stripped of his wealth. He was thrown into the Tower of London. Think of the timeline. The colonists are waiting. They are lighting fires on the shore. They are watching the horizon, but the only man in England who cares about them is sitting in a cold stone cell, awaiting execution. The Lost Colony was Raleigh's private venture. When Raleigh fell, the colony became an orphan. The crown seized his assets, but they didn't seize his debts, and the colony was seen as a debt. It was a money pit. It required ships, supplies, and men. King James looked at the map of Virginia. He didn't see English citizens in need of rescue. He saw a failed experiment by a trader. So the order to search was quietly deprioritized. There were no public announcements. No one said, "We are giving up." They simply stopped signing the checks. The ships stopped sailing. The letters stopped being written. The silence that descended on Roanoke wasn't just the silence of the woods. It was the silence of bureaucracy. There is a darker reason too. A reason that involves global politics. King James I wanted peace. For decades, England and Spain had been tearing each other apart. The Atlantic Ocean was a graveyard of galleons. James wanted to end the war. He opened negotiations with the Spanish crown, but there was a sticking point that Spain claimed all of North America. They called it La Florida. They did not recognize England's right to settle there if James admitted that there was an active English colony in Roanoke Colony that had been there since 1587. It would have been an insult to Spain. It would have been proof that England was encroaching on Spanish territory. It would have threatened the peace treaty. So a diplomatic calculus was made. If the colony is lost, it's a tragedy. If the colony is found and thriving, it's an act of war. For the Treaty of London to be signed in 1604, Roanoke had to disappear. It is possible that James assured the Spanish ambassadors, "Do not worry. That settlement failed. It is gone. The land is empty." By declaring them lost, he bought peace for the empire. He traded 115 lives for a treaty. This explains why. When the next colony was founded at Jamestown in 1607, the orders were so confusing, they were told to settle further north. In the Chesapeake Bay, away from Roanoke, they were told to be careful. The empire was trying to start over. They wanted a clean slate. And you can't have a clean slate if the ghosts of the previous failure are still walking around. The tragedy deepens when we look at Jamestown. Jamestown was founded in 1607. This is only 20 years after Roanoke. The survivors would have been in their 40s or 50s. The children, like Virginia Dare, would have been young adults. The Jamestown settlers heard rumors almost immediately. Captain John Smith, a famous explorer, wrote about it. The local tribes told him stories. They spoke of men clothed like you. They spoke of a place called Okanahonan, where the houses were built of stone. They spoke of people who kept tame turkeys and processed copper. John Smith actually drew a map. He marked the location where the survivors were rumored to be. It wasn't far. A few days' march. So why didn't they go? Why didn't John Smith march a regiment south and bring them home? Because Jamestown was dying. They were starving. They were drinking brackish water. They were fighting the Powhatan Empire. They barely had the strength to bury their own dead, let alone launch a rescue mission into hostile territory, to find a group of people who might not want to be found. And there's another chilling possibility. The Powhatan priest told John Smith that the Roanoke survivors had been there, but they said that Chief Powhatan, the father of Pocahontas, had slaughtered them. He claimed he wiped them out just days before the Jamestown ships arrived. Was this true? Or was it a power move? Was Powhatan telling Smith, "I killed your brothers and I can kill you too"? Or was he protecting them? If the survivors had assimilated, if they had become the blue-eyed tribe, perhaps the local chiefs lied to the English to keep them away. They are dead. Don't go looking. And the British Empire, exhausted and broke, was all too happy to believe the lie. It was easier to accept that they were dead than to mount an expedition to find them. So the search was abandoned, not because the trail went cold, but because the searchers were too weak and the Empire was too indifferent. There is one piece of paper that proves the king knew more than he said. It is called the Zuniga map. It was a map drawn by a Jamestown settler in 1608, but it didn't stay in England. It was stolen by a Spanish spy named Pedro de Zuniga and sent to the King of Spain on this map. There is a note. It points to a location inland from Roanoke, and it says, "Here remain 4 men clothed that came from Roanoke." Here remain, present tense. 1608. The King of Spain knew they were alive. The King of England likely knew they were alive, but neither king did anything. Spain didn't attack because the colony was deep inland and no longer a threat. England didn't rescue because the colony was politically dead. So the 4 men and the others with them were left in a geopolitical limbo. They were casualties of a Cold War. This is the ultimate betrayal. To be known, to be mapped, and yet to be ignored. History is a heavy book. It is full of blank pages where people should be. But as we close this chapter, let us find peace in the resilience of the human spirit. The Empire abandoned them, but the land did not. When the ships didn't come, the colonists stopped looking at the horizon. They turned their faces to the forest. They turned their faces to each other. They stopped being subjects of the crown. They became free people. In a way, the abandonment was their liberation. They were forced to build a new world. A world without kings, without taxes, without the politics of London. They built a life of copper and clay, of deer and corn. The silence of the British Empire was cruel, but in that silence a new American story was born. Let the anger at the king fade away. He is dust now. His treaties are dust, but the blood of the survivors flows on. Imagine the quiet of the map room again. The scroll is rolled up. The candle is blown out. The secret is safe in the dark. You can rest now. The search is over. You don't need to look anymore. You are found. You are here. You are safe. Drift into the history. Drift into the sleep. Good night. We have spent 400 years asking what happened to the Lost Colony, but we never asked why they were sent there in the first place. The most terrifying answer isn't that they were lost by accident. It is that they were discarded on purpose. Historians have long been puzzled by the logistics of the 1587 voyage. They were sent to the wrong location. They were sent with insufficient food. They were landed on an island known to be hostile at the worst possible time of year for planting. These aren't mistakes. These are deliberate choices. The brutal truth is that Roanoke was likely a decoy, a Potemkin village made of flesh and bone, designed to draw the attention of the Spanish Armada away from England's real interest to the north. They were bait. Sir Walter Raleigh and the Queen didn't plant a colony to grow crops. They planted a colony to waste Spanish gunpowder. The 115 men, women, and children were not pioneers. They were a human shield sacrificed on the altar of geopolitics. They were never meant to survive the winter. They were just meant to die slowly enough to keep the enemy occupied. This is the truth the king buried. Now. Let the gavel fall. The trial of history is over. The verdict is in. The room is silent. The candles have burned down to pools of wax. The maps are rolled up. The ghosts have told their stories. We are standing at the end of the long corridor of time. Outside, the night is absolute. The stars are wheeling overhead, indifferent to the schemes of kings and queens. We are going to take one last look at the island. We are going to walk the sandy shores of 1587 one last time, not with fear, but with understanding. Relax your hands. Unclench your jaw. Let the weight of the conspiracy fall off your shoulders. We are going to witness the final act. To understand the sacrifice theory, we must look at the man who steered the ship. Simon Fernandes, he was a Portuguese pilot hired by the English. A man of shadowy allegiances. The official plan for the 1587 colony was explicit. They were not supposed to stop at Roanoke. They were supposed to go to the Chesapeake Bay, a deep, calm harbor with friendly soil. Miles to the north, Roanoke was known to be a death trap. The soil was sandy. The local tribes were already hostile because of previous English violence, yet when the ships arrived off the coast of Roanoke to check on a small garrison, Fernandes made a sudden, inexplicable decision. He ordered the sailors to dump the colonists on the beach. "Your summer is far spent," he told them. "I will not take you further." He forced 115 civilians, pregnant women, children, carpenters off the ships and onto the island he knew was dangerous. Historians call this insubordination. But in the military, insubordination gets you hanged. Fernandes returned to England. Was he punished? Was he executed for disobeying the governor and endangering the Queen's subjects? No, he continued to work. He continued to live freely. This suggests that Fernandes wasn't disobeying orders. He was following secret orders. The Chesapeake plan might have been a cover story to get the colonists on the boat. Who would sign up to go to a sandy island where the last group had starved? No one. So they were promised the Chesapeake, the promised land, but the crown needed them on Roanoke. Why? Because Roanoke is visible from the sea. If the Spanish came hunting, they would see the smoke. They would stop to attack. They would waste time navigating the treacherous shoals of the Outer Banks, the graveyard of the Atlantic. The colonists were a speed bump for the Spanish Navy. Imagine the betrayal felt by John White. He stood on the beach, watching the ships leave, realizing he had been duped, realizing his family was trapped in a strategic kill box. The cruelty of the empire is not that it hates its subjects. It is that it is indifferent to them. They were pawns on a chessboard, sacrificed to save the queen. There is a deeper, more esoteric layer to the sacrifice. We spoke earlier of John Dee, the queen's sorcerer. In alchemy and ancient mythology, there is a concept called foundation sacrifice. When you build a bridge, or a castle, or an empire, you must pay a price to the earth. You must bury something alive in the foundation to ensure the structure stands. The Romans did it. The builders of medieval cathedrals did it, often with animals. John Dee viewed the colonization of North America as the founding of a New Jerusalem, a spiritual temple. Did. He believed that a blood sacrifice was required to open the continent. The story of Cadmus in Greek mythology tells of a hero who killed a dragon and sewed its teeth into the ground. From those teeth, a race of warriors sprang up. The 115 colonists were the dragon's teeth. They were planted in the earth of the New World. They died or were absorbed. And from their planting, the British Empire eventually grew. It is a horrific thought. But look at the history. Roanoke failed. But because it failed, Jamestown learned. Because Jamestown struggled, Plymouth learned. The DNA of the United States is built on the bones of Roanoke. If the sacrifice theory is true, then the colony succeeded. They didn't succeed in farming. They succeeded in dying. They succeeded in consecrating the ground with English blood, marking it for future generations. They were the seed. And seeds must be buried in the dark before they can grow. Let us leave the cold calculations of London and stand with the colonists one last time. It is late. 1587. The ships are gone. The winter is coming. They realize that help is not coming. At first, there must have been panic, anger, screaming at the ocean. But then, a shift. Human beings are incredibly adaptable. When the hope of rescue dies, the reality of living begins. They looked at their supplies. They looked at the forest. They realized that if they stayed in the fort, waiting for England, they would die. So they made the choice to leave the fort, to leave the empire. This is the moment of the sacrifice becoming a liberation. They stopped being English subjects. They stopped waiting for the Queen to save them. They saved themselves. They took the wood from the houses. They packed the tools. They walked into the woods. In doing so, they ceased to be colonists. They became inhabitants. The sacrifice wasn't a death sentence. It was a transformation. The king buried the truth because he couldn't accept that his subjects could survive without him. He couldn't accept that they walked away from his protection and found a better life with the savages. The ultimate secret of Roanoke is not that they died. It is that they stopped needing England. Now, look at the full picture we have painted together tonight. We saw the silent fort, the dinner table set for ghosts. We decoded the Croatoan warning, the sign of the transition. We uncovered the Queen's sorcerer, John Dee, spinning his webs. We found the patch on the map, hiding the diamond fort. We read the dare stones, the mother's desperate cry in rock. We chased the White Doe, the legend of the wild child. We watched the Spanish spies find nothing but wind. We felt the harvest of the ancient woods. We traced the blue eyes of the Lumbee people. We touched the buried gold ring. We exposed the political abandonment. And now, we accept the sacrifice. It is a tapestry woven of shadow and light. It tells us that history is not a straight line. It is a forest. Paths branch off. People get lost, but lost is just a word we use when we cannot see where they went. They were not lost to themselves. They were right there, living, breathing, loving, dying. The Roanoke nightmare is over. We have shined a light into every dark corner. There are no more monsters. Only ancestors. The fire is out now. The story is told. The heavy book of Roanoke is closed. You can hear the leather cover settle. Dust motes dance in the air. The island of Roanoke is sleeping. The waves of the Atlantic are gently washing over the sand, erasing the footprints of the past. Wash. And clear. Wash. And clear. The diamond fort is sleeping under the golf course, holding its secrets tight. The blue-eyed children are sleeping in their beds, dreaming of forests they have never seen. And you are safe in the present. You are far away from the storms of 1587. Let the weight of the centuries slide off you. You have carried the burden of the mystery long enough. It is time to let the colonists rest. It is time to let the Queen rest. It is time to let yourself rest. Imagine you are floating on a calm, dark ocean. The water is warm. The sky is full of stars. You are drifting, slowly, without effort. The current is taking you to a place of perfect peace. A place where there are no questions, only silence. The king buried the truth, but we found it. And now we give it back to the night. Drift away. Drift away. The woods are watching over you. The stars are guiding you. Sleep.